Hello, hello. Good evening on a very much not Wednesday. Evo, Evo. How are you? Hope you're good. Thank you for the bed. Good evening. I hope you're all doing well. You know what's bothering me? It could be wrong though. I feel like I'm wrong. Maybe it's just me looking at my own screen right now, but the girls, they're not centered on this picture. So the text isn't either. Like, text is closer to the right side than it is to the left. God damn. Anyway, hi. Good evening. It is Tuesday. It is Tuesday, and because the weather is okayish, like it's a nice warmth outside there. I thought to myself, you know what? I have the time today. Let's read more of this game. For one, because we only got started on it a little bit last week, and I feel like we didn't really get anywhere. Two, I really want to know more about the game. And three, it's gonna be way hotter rest of the week, and I'm already scared like that something is gonna get in the way of my streams again. So like, you know what? I'll take this chance. Thank you for the fact. I'll take this chance and read a little tonight and see how far we get, where we get. So if nothing else happens this week that will, prevent me from streaming, good for me. If something does indeed happen, well, we have today, so that's nice, right? But yeah, we didn't. It's supposed to be cool here this week, thankfully. Ooh, I mean, we did get rain yesterday night. Actually, I literally I got a whole like warning because there was such a storm brewing that I got a warning on my phone actually. Didn't really hit until really late into the night, like sometime after midnight. I was awake until a little after midnight, and I had my windows like, we have this thing here in Germany where like the windows are kip. Like, it doesn't exist. This is something we do where you open the windows in a way that only like the upper part like is open and the lower part is still closed, so you get a little bit of airflow in, but you don't have the entire window open. But I had them like this, and suddenly I hear like a smattering of rain against them. I'm like, oh, that's a lot of rain. That's more rain than I expected, but it was good. And then today it was only 27 degrees Celsius, so genuinely, and like, normally I would say that's still too warm for me personally, but having like 10 degrees of a difference of 10 degrees one day after the other, it's like perfect. Like, it doesn't feel hot anymore at all, because like the other days were terrible. Things are going to flood here. Oh no, that's not good. A little rain is good. Flood, not so much. You have that too. It's good. It's like just getting a little air in. You gotta take what we can with the weather. That's true. It's like, I mean, you can't really change what the weather does, can you? But yeah, we're gonna jump back into this game. I do not. I know I say this every time we read visual novels, and I'm sorry. I do not remember how I did the voices. I think I did the main girl's voice a little darker, a little like lower than my usual voice, and the girl's voice is a little higher, but I honestly don't know. We'll see what happens. Anyway, we what did we do? We came to this. Mena was trying to find a way to cure our sickness that is called the Pale, which is funny. That's also what the whole supernatural stuff in Disco Elysium was called. It was also the Pale. We're just hanging out with this girl now, who lost her father 6 years ago, who was researching who's a doctor and was also researching the thing, and we were like, maybe we'll find something in his notes, but I highly doubt it. Honestly, I highly doubt that we'll find a cure for the sickness. I don't think this game has a happy ending in that sense. I don't really think it would have. But we'll see. Who the hell is talking right now? How are there so many of these accursed things? I don't know who. Ah! It's a father. Yeah, it was a good place where we stopped last time. If this is a flashback scene, that's good. Wiping the sweat from his brow with a forearm, the man sighed heavily. He was only halfway through planting his potatoes, one of the staple crops he planned. They were taking him much longer than expected, and it was far from an enjoyable process. It's one thing. It's like, oh yeah, I'll just live off the crops I plant and harvest myself, but that's a little harder to do than just, plant one thing and be done with it. With all the work I've put into this patch, I expect some damn fine produce to come out of it. He nodded sharply to the freshly tilled earth around him, which currently only offered a few sparse seedlings. Still, despite all his annoyance and grumbling, Isaiah could deny the satisfaction he felt from surveying his work. Between the garden and the newly renovated manor, his old family grounds were becoming a beautiful, independent refuge in the forest. At last he would be free from the will of others, free from all the rules, structures, and arbitrary games of society. Society! It was well worth the price of being completely alone. What do you mean completely alone? What about your daughter? Well, not entirely alone. Isaiah's gaze flicked towards a small figure sitting in the grass nearby, toying with flowers and giggling with wonder at the sky. The scene was one he'd longed for so many times. Only in his dreams, she was here too. Laughing and holding that child, the sunlight glittering on their matching hair. Without her, it seemed like nothing more than a sad joke, the caricature of a clueless father played for a fool by his beloved. Oh, what a fool I am. He muttered bitterly to himself, tossing his shovel aside and rubbing a hand across his brow. Stuck with a child I've no clue how to care for. Out here gardening and laboring when I'm nothing but a witless academic who inadvertently slew all of his houseplants by forgetting to water them. That sounds like a great start. I've got myself into quite the mess this time, haven't I? His chest heaved with a long, tired sigh. As much as he tried to convince himself this was the right choice, that he'd be happy out here than in the city, a sense of doubt always came creeping back to him. And, like it had for so many years, the pale, icy grip still held him in its clutches. Early in the year, when he was cleaning and refurbishing the manor for his new family, Isaiah had barely felt the symptoms. A wealth of energy flowed through him, and all of his lethargy was washed away by tides of excitement. But now, he couldn't rouse himself from bed half the time, and the disease attacked him savagely when he least expected it. His last true hope for living, the only thing giving him the will to fight the Pale's onslaught, was a search for a cure. Though he could feel that hope beginning to wane too. Papa. Oh, that's a little high. Though, to be fair, that was when she was younger, so it would fit to give her a more babyish voice. The man jerked his head towards the source of that tiny voice. He kept forgetting she was even there, playing among the flowers. But when he looked down at the child, he saw her tiny hand outstretched towards him. A little white blossom lay in the center of her palm, offered up to him alongside a sunny, guileless smile. Reluctantly, the man lowered down to one knee. With hesitant, uncertain fingers, he reached out to take her offering, holding it in his much larger palm. Papa, Papa. The girl delightedly clapped her hands, breaking into a happy fit of giggles. Isaiah watched her for several long moments, his face contorting slightly, as if it wasn't fully sure what expression to make. What a silly girl. Like a damned babbling brook you are. Silence is a virtue, especially for children. Bro! She's like, what, 3? Grumbling quietly, he shoved the white flower into his pocket, then reached out to pick up his shovel once more. There was still a great deal of planting to be done. He had to take advantage of days like today when he had the strength to work properly. No time to be playing around with flowers, certainly. You want a Pikachu? Okay.
Pikachu. Pika pika. Pikachu.
With that, he set about digging again, driving his shovel into the soft earth with vehement strikes. What a strange life he had created for himself. Strange, solitary, and most likely a very difficult one indeed. There was much he had to learn, and not simply for academic curiosity, but for their survival. It was a heavy pressure, unforgiving and merciless as nature itself. Nor was he a young fit man full of vigorous energy any longer, able to finish 100 tasks in one day. But somehow he couldn't imagine going back to how life was before. Even if he never became a skilled farmer or a decent carpenter or an adept tailor, at least he was forging his path with his own two hands. As long as he retained that endless freedom, cherished it, grew bolder in it, and one day perhaps even passed it down to her, he could surely carry any weight on his shoulders along the way. You could learn to actually interact with your child properly while doing all that. You gotta head back to work, yeah! Have fun. Hope the day goes over fast. What? Hope the day goes by fast. Thank you for coming by. A distant rumble stirred Esther from her sleep. Her hazy, half-open eyes drifted towards the window, where a dull sky greeted her with a little morning light. Dark, heavy drops sluggishly coursed down the glass, forming jagged patterns that soon dissolved into nothingness. She's still very pretty. The grayness brought back her memories of the city. Dim, cold dawns filtering through a bedroom window, minutes spent staring out past the smoking chimneys into the industrial fog that always clouded her view. Mornings where it felt like an immense struggle to will herself upward, to muster the strength for starting a new day. She could hear her parents down below, their muffled voices greeting each other cheerfully over tea and breakfast. Yo, both the day and gay goes over fast. But as much as she clearly wanted to join them, the longer she lay there, listening to their light chatter, the more she felt removed from them altogether. A sense of loneliness so deep that it grew complicated, resigned to the fact that she would never again rejoin the unafflicted world. I wonder, what they do to people who apparently suffer from this illness. It's is it like, oh, you have the pale, you are not allowed to go near anyone ever again? And the more she dwelled on that solemn thought, the less Esther felt like she wanted to rejoin such a world at all. Until finally, a restless sleep slowly would come to cover her in darkness once more. Esther, are you awake? Her eyelids fluttered open again. When she jerked her head upwards, she saw Sena standing beside the sofa, looking down at her rather timidly. I'm so sorry if I woke you up. I just thought I'd make some tea, so I was checking if I should put on a bigger pot for the two of us. Despite a light smile, something in Sena's tone seemed to carry a hint of worry. Almost automatically, Esther slowly pushed herself into a sitting position. She barely realized it until her bare feet brushed the floor, sending a faint shiver up her spine. It's fine. I was already awake. Thank you for checking on me. Oh, of course. Sena looked relieved, nodding contently to Esther's words. Tea for two then. I'll go put in a kettle. Oh, and I thought we could stay inside today. I normally do on rainy days. We could go over Papa's books and research together, maybe, if I wouldn't bother you. I'd be grateful for your help, Sena. There are so many books and papers, I barely know where to start. Yes, of course. I'd be happy to help. I'm so excited. Oh, but first things first, the tea. I'll go fix a pot that's perfect for a day like this. If you don't mind, could you start the fire and light a few candles, Esther? There's a tinderbox in the desk by the window. I thought she didn't like using... Hold on. How did that happen? I thought she didn't like using the candles because it's hard for her to actually, make the wax and everything again. Hi, Dad. Hi, Itzy. How are you doing? With that, she turned to hurry off into the kitchen, the soft pattering of her footsteps buried beneath the drone of heavy rain. That's a game. That's quite old at this point. Again, in an unconscious movement, Esther found herself rising from a nest of blankets with little effort. It caught her off guard. Normally, her illness left her all but catatonic on overcast days. Perhaps her self-consciousness around Sena was an even stronger force than her deep lethargy. I don't know where to put the emphasis on in that word. Either way, it seemed best not to question it. After changing into her day clothes and fishing out the tinderbox Dana mentioned, Estelle knelt down to kindle the fireplace. As soon as it flickered to life, filling the room with a warm light and steady crackling, she felt like a spark of energy lit inside her too. You're good, you just woke up. Oh, good morning. Us in-game, we also just woke up. It's a new day. Good morning. So strange how only a small fire could make such a difference. When Sena returned, she proudly held a fine silver tray in her hands. Along with tea, she brought 2 bowls of the granola she'd freshly made, a deliciously comforting breakfast alongside the warm drinks. They sat down on the sofa to munch together, watching the rain torrent down in sheets past the window pane. It was one of those heavy, blanketing storms that made a person grateful to have shelter, nurturing some deep instinct to curl up inside and wait for the rain to pass. Sitting together for an unhurried meal, reassured by the warm fire and pattering raindrops that all was safe. It was a simple pleasure, but the more she dwelled on it, the more Esther found a calm, reassuring satisfaction in the moment. At one point, Sena giggled faintly, to which Esther gave her a puzzled glance. You were making a really cute, charming face just now. Like a little cat after it just finished a sauce of cream. Immediately upset. Esther hastily raised her mug and took a long sip of tea, taking refuge behind the painted ceramic. Oh, I'm not teasing you. I know I make funny faces too. It just makes me happy to see you like that, and when you first arrived, you looked so hollow. Hollow? Sena nodded, lowering her gaze to where she grasped a warm mug in both hands. Yeah, hollow. Like you didn't have anything left, I suppose? From her suddenly reluctant, almost wary reply, it almost seemed as if she was familiar with such a look. She could have been imagining things, but Esther thought she saw Sena shudder faintly, drawing closer to the fireplace. Well, since we're both finished, I think I'll go wash up. She hopped up to her feet, stacking her bowls together atop the tray. Alright, I'll go upstairs and look for some books to bring down. Oh yes, you can light the candles up there if you want, since it's so dark. I'll meet you back here in a bit then. She literally the first day we got here, she was like, oh, I don't really use the candles that much because making the wax myself is really hard, like finding the materials for it. And now she's like, oh yeah, sure, let's light like 500 candles at once, let's go. With that, Sena swiveled to make her way towards the kitchen, her tray rattling softly. Her retreat seemed a little hastier than normal. Esther had the sense she was still bothered by something, perhaps the comment she'd made earlier about looking hollow. Despite her warm friendliness, Sena had a certain guarded side to her, a private shield and degree of separation that Esther hadn't expected. It might fade eventually if they grew to know each other better, but right now Esther felt like Sena was almost keeping her at arm's length in a strange way. You've known each other for like 2 days. After summoning the strength required to leave the warm, cozy fire, Esther forced herself out into the hallway and up the creaky stairs. But when she stepped into the study, just like before, Esther felt an oppressive, bleak atmosphere pressing down around her. In her haste to light the candles, she nearly tripped over her own 2 feet. The glow didn't wholly alleviate the grim darkness, but it was enough to bring Esther a little relief. Why did this room bother her so much? By all accounts, it simply looked like a normal study, albeit a messy one. There was nothing that should have set her on edge. Exhaling a long sigh, she inwardly mocked herself for her cowardice. She was here to find a cure, not to get caught up in her silly fear of shadows. But the more she glanced around the small library with its overflowing shelves and piles of scattered books and papers, the more daunting her task felt. The only real trail of research that Isaiah left were his scattered writings. Uncovering his studies would have been far easier if they were bound together, not written on individual scraps of parchment. However, if Isaiah went through phases of studying different subjects, perhaps the journal pages stuffed into similar books would be from roughly the same period of his life. Maybe. With that hope in mind, Esther returned to the spot she'd found the previous journal entry, scoring intensely over the row of dusty tomes. It didn't take long for her to spot another piece of parchment, this one tucked inside a small leather book. Eagerly pulling it from the shelf, she let the tome fall open in her palms, revealing a short page scribbled in Isaiah's hand. Oh, another one. She baffles me, that little girl. Always laughing, always cheerful, always smiling and patient with me, even after I raise my voice at her. I've only seen her cry once. It happened when I brought her outside this morning, preparing to bring her to the city's orphanage. As if she somehow knew our destination, the girl instantly began to bawl and scream, a dreadful sound that I should hope never to hear again. So dreadful, in fact, that I could not stomach the thought of hearing it for hours, so I was forced to cancel my trip. I suppose I will keep her here for now. When she gets older, she may be useful at cleaning and tending the land with me, at least. With any luck, she will have inherited my work ethic instead of her mother's. Oh my god, dude. You have no idea how to raise a child, do you? Isaiah had mentioned taking Sena to an orphanage in the last journal she'd read. The two entries must have been written very close together. Her hunch was right. The discovery made her heart leap with excitement, even though it was only a small revelation. But if she could piece together Isaiah's path of study chronologically, as well as his inner thoughts, she might have a chance at figuring out his approach to a cure. A small note suddenly fluttered out from the back of the book, startling Esther. She bent down to grab it, her eyes drifting over the scribbled writing. Reminder, finish reading and annotating the latest tome on spirits. Any relation to the pale still seems unlikely, but if all my chemical and biological studies have been fruitless, what have I to lose? Oh, so he has been looking into the paranormal. She turned the book over to glance at its cover and spine, but there was no name to be seen. However, when she opened it to the first page, a large title stretched across the parchment in sharp letters. Excuse me? Smarvavet? A treatise on spirits of shadow? Spirits of shadow. For some reason, as she murmured part of the title aloud to herself, Esther felt a faint chill crawling up her spine. It was only a book on superstition and unfounded claims, surely, but if Isaiah had singled it out, maybe it was still worth scanning through. Wasting not a minute further, she scooped up some of the surrounding books and loose papers on a shelf, cradling them carefully in her arms. But before she left, she had to quickly blow out all the candles, and once the gloomy darkness returned, it seemed even deeper than before. Once she descended the stairs and returned to the warmly lit parlor, Esther exhaled a quiet sigh of relief. Sina was already waiting on the sofa, huddled up beneath a large fluffy red blanket. Hello, Esther. Welcome back. Look at all those books. Here, I'll help you. She sprung off the cushions eagerly, as if Esther's return was a welcome relief for her, too. Together, they stacked up the books and papers at one end of the sofa, forming a rather intimidating pile. Sena, however, didn't seem fazed in the slightest by the tower of texts and bent down to examine the titles curiously. Natural science, astronomy, alchemy. I don't think I've ever seen any of these before. Wait. This book. I remember this one. Sena reached for the same book Esther picked up first, the book on spirits. Yeah, Papa was always reading this book and scribbling notes. I asked him about it again and again, but he never told me why he was so obsessed with it. I guess he thought it would frighten me too much. With a soft sigh, she sank back down onto the sofa, still holding the book with a certain reverence. When Esther settled in beside her, Sena reached out to drape the blanket around the other girl's shoulders. Thank you. It's cozy. Isn't it? Reading is a lot better when you're wrapped in a blanket. Makes you more likely to fall asleep, though. Just saying. Well then, let's see what Papa was fussing over so much. Are you ready? Wait, wouldn't it make more sense if each of us grabbed a different book? No, I can't take a... I want to take a picture. Holding the book up so that Esther could see the pages, Sena began to read aloud, focusing on the pages her father had scribbled on the most. Before long, both of them were equally transfixed. In a strange blend of psychology, philosophy, and the supernatural, the author described how different spirits affected one's body and mind in different ways. The term spirits didn't refer solely to departed souls, but rather certain essences of the universe that manifested in concentrated forms. Some could be channeled for purposes like healing, luck, or creative inspiration, but most couldn't be controlled by humans. They would simply pass through the body of their own accord, or as dictated by other factors in the environment. However, as fascinating as it was to consider, Esther listened with a skeptical detachment. With no proof beyond his own research and anecdotal evidence, the author's claims could hardly rival any real scientific study. And, more importantly, Esther couldn't see any real relation to the Pale, at least not in a way that would help her find a cure. Just as she was about to suggest to try a different book, Sena turned to a new chapter. It only lasted a single page, and the page after it was completely blank. A short warning on the study of the Arafel. When her eyes roamed across the title, a small shiver ran through her body, just like it had earlier. Such a short chapter. That's interesting, don't you think? This author likes using far too many words, so he really must have run out of ideas for this one. After a small giggle to herself, Sena cleared her throat before starting to read once more. What's this one say? Though the realm of spirits is infinitely diverse, all those noted thus far have one thing in common. Their energy is ephemeral, and they will rarely affect the body for extended periods. However, there is one type of spirit that will not only invade, but overtake a human soul whenever they are given a chance. They are known as the Arafel, shades that lie completely beyond the realm of mortal understanding. I shall not write in detail of them here, for it is said that dwelling on the Arafel will often draw them to one's presence, and thus few have dared to document them. Once their attention is garnered, they will lure in their unsuspecting target without remorse, or more precisely, the target will be drawn to them inescapably without realizing or understanding their own actions. My sole warning, then, is to avoid any study or investigation of these spirits. Do not trifle with the darker workings of nature, no matter how alluring their call may be. Some aspects of the unseen world are meant to remain untouched. Funky. After she finished reading, the parlor grew chillingly silent. For a moment it felt as if the fire's warmth had vanished, and the only thing staving off the cold air was Sena's small form huddling against Esther. Neither of them immediately spoke. Both of their gazes were still drawn to the single page lying open beside its empty, bone-white twin. Unlike most of the other chapters where Isaiah had lined the margins with his scribbled comments, this chapter was completely devoid of any such notes. The only mark he'd left was a dark, bold outline beneath the first mention of Arafel. The thick ink blot beside it suggested his pen had lingered there for a time. Either he'd been deliberating about writing more, or else he had simply gotten lost in thought. The Arafel. It's a pretty name, but the way he describes them, it's really eerie. Sena finally broke the silence, her hesitant voice barely above a whisper. What do you suppose it means, Esther? Could they have something to do with the Pale? She offered no reply for a long moment. A murky, uncertain feeling shifted briefly at the back of her mind, before she pushed it away, annoyed at her own bothersome insecurities. I don't believe in whatever he's talking about. Even if spirits like that existed, there's no reason why they'd be related to the Pale. It's a disease of the body. He eased the symptoms with a tonic, not with a priest warding off spirits. The more she voiced her thoughts aloud, the more firmly Esther believed them. The lure of superstition had only tempted her in a moment of weakness, and her impatience to find a cure. But I'll still keep looking for Isaiah's notes on them. His research on spirits might have led him somewhere else important. You're right. Maybe Papa found another lead. Something more, sturdy? It was easy to see the doubt on her face. Did Sena really believe in such things? She was younger, of course, but still far more intelligent and mature than most girls Esther knew. It wasn't simply a case of a naive child being afraid of ghosts. Why then would she give any credence to such far-fetched writings? Esther just couldn't understand it. Let's look to something else. Yeah, let's. In the brief moment of awkwardness that followed, Sena cleared her throat a little nervously before pausing with a shy, slightly embarrassed smile. Could I ask you a favor, Esther? I'd really like to read one of Papa's journal pages, but... Well, like I said yesterday, he always told me not to. She twirled a few strands of hair around one finger, letting out a rueful laugh. There were lots of things he was ashamed he'd written, he said, but he didn't want to throw them away. He needed to remember what he'd written and thought about so that he'd never make the same mistakes again. I don't know which journals are ones he wouldn't want me reading, but maybe you could look one over quickly and see? Of course. After briefly hesitating, Esther nodded. She was happy to do anything to repay Sena's many kindnesses, but after reading Isaiah's past journal entries, it seemed like they might be more painful for Sena than anything. Yeah, imagine being like, oh, you told me to, like, read you what your father has written in his journals. So this one is about how he hates your mom because she went back with someone she was dating before, and also he had no clue how to raise you or what to do with you, so tough luck. Picking up a few bound pieces of parchment from the pile, Esther quickly scanned over the pages, searching for any mention of Sena that might upset the other girl if she read it. Fortunately, though, the entry she picked up seemed unrelated to family matters. It looked more like a hastily, angrily scribbled rant, the penmanship even messier than Isaiah's normal writings. This one, shall I read it for us? Oh, yes, please. Resting her chin on Esther's shoulder, she peered curiously at the frenzied scribbling. With a deep inhale, Esther slowly began to read Isaiah's words out loud. Earlier today, I was reflecting upon my departure from the Academy's medical circle. At the time, it was such a difficult decision, such an agonizing farewell. Now, however, I look back upon those times with awe, wondering how on earth I ever survived in such a place. I was constantly delegating research and experiments to different departments, and yet nearly every completed task would always return to me with some issue. The use of faulty tools or sloppy documentation, contaminated materials, careless omission of important details, it exasperated me to no end. Even the purported finest of researchers with the most spotless of records always seemed to deliver a perfunctory performance. Then, whenever I would bring my unsatisfying results before the head, he acted as if he didn't care in the slightest. On occasion, he'd echo my complaints with sympathetic tutting and a shake of his head, but in the end, I got that he simply had no investment in the results. Much of the time, the head went so far as to defend their mistakes, only stopping at the edge of calling me an outright fool for caring as much as I did. Any problems I encountered were mine to resolve. Every issue would be solely mine to bear. Frustration brought me to the edge of breaking down over and over again, and only my damned refusal to concede would pull me back from the brink. And certainly, perhaps I am far too finical and needlessly worried over fine details. Despite my vanity, I realize I can be hopelessly stubborn at times. But is it such a crime to strive for the best performance one can achieve? To care so passionately for beautiful results, a delicate procedure, a loving attention to detail? Can I rightly be called mad for my longing to make my envisioned perfection into a reality? Or, if not perfection, then its very closest sibling, a masterpiece of planning? No, I see now with lucid eyes. Leaving that hive of mediocrity was truly a blessing in disguise. Whatever I can accomplish alone will no doubt be far smaller in scale than anything I could have done at the Academy, this I realize. But in the end, to be truly pleased with one's work, it must be solely a product of one's own design. And somehow it brings me an odd, unexpected comfort in these long days of solitary research and study, knowing I shall have no one to blame but myself when I am dissatisfied. I see. To Esther's surprise, as soon as she finished reading, Sena broke out into warm, delicate laughter. Delighted! Delicate? What am I saying? That it just sounds so much like Papa, the little rants he would always go on about over dinner. He always took himself and his work really impossibly seriously. Never any slacking, always beating himself up over his mistakes. It brings back so many memories. Slowly the bright, affectionate smile on her face began to wane. She seemed to be struggling to keep herself cheery in the face of whatever she'd remembered, but it appeared to be a losing battle. Sena, your father... Hesitating as the bitter lip. You don't have to answer, but could I ask what happened to him? I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked. No, it's fine. Sena reached out, placing a small hand on Esther's arm reassuringly. In a way, the faint smile she wore seemed almost grateful, as if it was something she'd wanted to talk about but hadn't been able to bring up. At first I didn't realize he was gone. That morning I woke up and started the day like usual, making a meal for both of us. I put Papa's on a little tray and brought it upstairs, planning to leave it outside his door, tell him I left him, then go start my chores. But an involuntary shudder went through her, briefly interrupting her holding quiet words. When I reached his study, I saw the door was open. For a moment I was so happy. I thought he was finally recovering and he could come play with me and work outside again. But he wasn't in his study, or anywhere in the manor, or outside in the garden. It was like he just vanished into thin air. When I realized Papa had disappeared, I was so scared. For 3 days all I did was search for him, everywhere I could. I didn't return to the manor at all. I only ate some berries and roots, drank from the stream, and slept on leaf beds. But I never found anything, not a single trace. She spoke in an ever fainter, trembling voice, her fingers curled tightly in the fabric of Esther's sleeve. It was evident from her slightly choked words that she was holding back tears as much as possible. Finally, I came back home. I didn't know what to do. It seemed like the end of everything. I thought I would die of starvation or sickness or from being all alone for the rest of my life. I didn't even have any tears left to cry. I just stared at Papa's door for hours and hours, wondering if I'd wake up from a bad dream. The only time I moved was when I heard a rustle from outside, hoping and praying it was him, but it never was. When night came, I couldn't sleep. I hid under my blankets and listened to the floorboards creaking over and over. She swallowed. For a long few moments, Sena went silent, but it was clear she wasn't finished, so Esther remained quiet. Then, one night, I was so exhausted that I couldn't stay awake anymore. I fell asleep, a deep sleep, the kind where it feels like you only just blink your eyes. Oh man, I could fall asleep right now. And when I woke up, the sun was shining so brightly through my window. I can't explain it, but I felt like it was telling me to keep living. To keep Papa's memory alive by protecting all his hard work, the manor, the gardens, the cemetery. He did so much to make us happy here. And on his desk, when I was cleaning it, I found everything he'd left for me. Special almanacs, maps and guidelines, and some gold coins in case of an emergency. It really made me believe he wanted me to go on without him. He didn't want me to give up. So I didn't. She finished it with a numb, almost featureless expression. It stood in contrast to the optimistic nature of her words, as if she still didn't fully believe them. At first, Esther couldn't think of any possible reply, so she just gingerly curled her arm around Sena, giving her a small comforting hug against her side. In response, the blonde girl rested her head on Esther's shoulder. She took a few shuddering breaths, squeezing her eyes shut for several moments, then reopening them with a long exhale. Sena. Her voice melded with the steady crackling of the fire, as low and gentle as possible. The question on the tip of her tongue. She didn't want to distress Sena further, but the story seemed so incomplete. She couldn't help it. She had no choice but to ask. Are you certain that your father is really passed on? Could it be that he just went back to the city? Sena stared with heavy-lidded eyes at the grey window pane, where the distant stormy sky still showed no sign of clearing. A long silence between them, but just as Esther began to wonder if Sena had heard her question. Before he disappeared, he was sick. I don't think he wanted to be alive anymore, even if he was afraid of death. I don't know how, but I just knew. I knew he was gone, so I stopped looking for him anymore. When I accepted it, I grieved for him for a long, long time. Until I could finally move on. With Seina's cheek on her shoulder, Esther could feel the warmth of small droplets falling against her blouse. Silently, she held the smaller girl close, listening to her breathing as it slowly grew less uneven. She couldn't say anything that would truly express the sorrow she felt for Seina. No platitudes or even words of comfort would do it any justice. There were some things that could only be shown through the warmth of a lasting hug. A reminder that someone else was there, understanding how much it hurt, even if they couldn't fully comprehend the way it felt. But in the end, it still never seemed like enough. I mean, she literally didn't know anyone else. And it was her father. It's gotta be weird. They suddenly pass away or vanish. Finally, after what felt like a very long while, Seina slowly straightened up. I'm sorry, Esther. We were supposed to be going through Papa's books and notes, weren't we? She gave a small sheepish laugh, brushing some of her hair behind one ear. But thank you. For listening, I mean. It really helps. You don't have to thank me. When Esther shook her head somberly, Seina's smile actually brightened a little. The sadness in her eyes was still apparent, but it also seemed slightly less heavy than before in a way. Well, I'm going to thank you anyway. I suppose a better thanks would be going over more of the research together, wouldn't it? There's still a lot left in the piles. Only if you feel well enough to... I do. Let's go through these first, shall we? Picking up another stack of parchment, Seina laid the pages out on her lap, shuffling some of them over to Esther. At first it felt a little awkward to start up working again after their talk, but the rustling of papers and rhythm of the murmured reading helped restore a comforting atmosphere. To their disappointment, however, they soon realized that none of the other papers were Isaiah's journals. Instead, they seemed to be his esoteric, incomprehensible notes taken from various book scientific theories, mixed in with long ramblings on the supernatural. At one point, the fire's warmth combined with the coziness of the slow-paced, quiet reading started lulling both girls to sleep. Me too! I'm getting super sleepy all of a sudden. Without even realizing it, they ended up slumping at opposite ends of the sofa, dozing off peacefully. When they awoke an hour or so later, they were equally hungry. Lunch had been forgotten in the midst of their engrossed work. But Esther was more than happy to help Seina in the kitchen, and together they cooked up a well-deserved meal of savory porridge with roasted vegetables. The two girls ate together mostly in contemplative silence, their thoughts preoccupied by Isaiah's books and writings. Delving into his journals had left a heavy, uncertain weight in the air, alongside the guilt and morbid fascination of uncovering dead secrets. Esther had no idea if Isaiah would have wanted his writings to be examined by a stranger, one who was mainly searching in her own self-interest at that. Lyri! Welcome, Raiders! Hi, Lyri! Welcome! Welcome, Raiders! I'm new. I like the color pink visual novels and JRPGs, and we're currently playing a game that I cannot pronounce. If any of you can pronounce the game's title, feel free. I do not know how to say it. Welcome! Good evening! How you doing? I hope you're all good. Did you beat Stray? You said you wanted to finish up Stray today. Did you beat it? How's it going? I'm good. I'm a little tired, but the weather today is nice. It's not like sweltering unbearable heat, so I thought to myself, you know what? Let's do a stream. Hi, hello. You did. You beat Stray. Nice. That's good. How you like it? I still want to play, but I have so many other games I need to finish first before I will allow myself to start playing it. You need to get some memories when you finish the story. Oh, incredible game. Okay, I've only heard good things about Stray. I'm very much looking forward to it. Hope you can beat the heat. Yeah. Yeah, it's all good. It's less than 30 degrees. It's less than 30 degrees, so well good. Thank you so much for the follow. Oh, it's buffering. Okay, but thank you for coming by. You shall log now because you streamed way longer than usually. You're drained. Oh, yeah. Yeah, hold on. It's almost 9 p.m. My time, my sense of time is completely off today because, you know, I started like a complete hour later than I usually start my streams as well. Oh my god. You recommend it so much. I'm glad. Yeah. As soon as I beat one of my weekend games, our current weekend games, I also start Stray. Also, thank you so much for the hydrate time. I'm not sure if I said thank you or not. My brain is mush. Have a lovely stream. Thank you. It's not buffering now. Yay! Twitch is just being Twitch, I feel like. You might stay. For anyone, the game we're playing a girl called Esther who stumbled her way into the deep dark woods, and we found a mansion. We heard that there may be a researcher here researching a sickness called the Pale that we're also suffering from. There's no cure for it so far. There's also no complete explanation for what it does to you, except that there's no cure. But seems like the researcher's already vanished some years ago, but his daughter still is living in the middle of nowhere in this house, so we've been staying with her for a little while, and she has allowed us to read up on her father's notes, and we're trying to see if we can find anything in there that's going to help us. Your brain is also much. Big mood. But Sena surely knew him better than anyone else, and she seemed just as eager as Esther to explore what her father left behind. It appeased a little bit of Esther's guilt, although she still had the sense of treading somewhere private, intruding on intimate thoughts that were only written down in an attempt to lighten their burden. After the meal, they returned to comb through more of Isaiah's research, but again, they met with little success. There was one thing of interest, however. In some of the books and scattered notes on spirits, Esther noticed an unsettling trend. Torn papers and large blacked out lines. It almost seemed like Isaiah had hunted down specific passages and attempted to erase them, but in an erratic, frenzied manner that went beyond even his normal messiness. In an eerie coincidence, she couldn't find any other mention of the Arafel. Perhaps it just happened to be missing from the book she brought down, though an ominous sense in her gut made her wonder if that was really the case. Something strange had happened here, and the more Esther pondered it, the more she burned with that desire to explore Isaiah's unraveled mind. That's weird. It got mentioned once, so now we know that there seemed to be some kind of paranormal being that exists, but then it's like, haha, shall never be named again. I'm sorry, Esther, but I don't think I can read another word tonight. Surrendering to a long, exhausted yawn, Sena stretched her arms out over her head. I don't think I can either. It's not exactly light reading. You can say that again. My brain feels like it's jumbled up from all that fancy writing. They really use 100 times more words than I have to, don't they? Yeah, academic writing is just inaccessible most of the time. It's like, why use many big words to explain something if you can also use the small words to say the exact same thing, making it easier to understand for all parties involved? Maybe it makes them feel smart? Well, it makes me feel bored. They really need to think about their audience more. She put on a playful pout, dangling her legs over the side of the couch. With a soft thud, her foot absentmindedly hit the side of Esther's satchel, which was still resting on the floor. Sorry, I knocked it over. Here, let me pick this up. You don't have to, it's fine, really. But Sena was already on her knees, scooping up the small trinkets and notes that had fallen from the pack. Is this your watch, Esther? It's very pretty. Yeah, I use that to step myself and get some kind of tonic in my body that is apparently a little helpful against my illness, but like not completely. Picking up the silver timepiece from the ground, Sena turned it over in her hand, studying it with curiously shining eyes. When did we change clothes, by the way? I just realized that we're back to her blouse, her day clothes, but when did we change clothes again? All of a sudden, Esther found herself deeply uncomfortable. It's not a normal watch. It holds my medicine. The watch part is only for tracking the time between doses. Doses? What do you... Reaching down, Esther picked up the silver timepiece from Sena's outstretched palm. Then, with her thumb atop one of the buttons, she pushed until the metal relented with a short, sharp click. Sena's eyes widened when the watch's back popped open, revealing the cruelly glittering needle hidden inside. The sight of it seemed to both repel and fascinate her, but most of all concern welled in her gaze as she glanced up to Esther. You inject yourself with that? Yes, every night. And I never, use any kind of disinfectant. I just stab myself with a piece of metal repeatedly every day, which is definitely healthy. And what happens if you don't? My muscles will slowly grow numb and give out altogether. At that point, I'll still be conscious, but it's only a matter of time before I will be comatose. It's possible to survive the paralysis for a short time, but if I don't quickly get another dose, my heart will stop. All the injection does is hold the threat at bay. It will always be there, no matter what. The fatigue of the pail is not really tiredness. It's a growing catatonia kept frozen in its earliest stage before you lose the ability to move. She could hear her own calm, detached voice echoing in her ears, describing the effects the same clinical way she had so many times before. That's so terrible. I'm so sorry, Esther. After a moment, Esther gave her a small shrug. To her, it was largely just another part of existence, a bodily need she had to deal with, like eating or sleeping. Of course, she longed to be rid of it, but after dealing with the pail for so long, she could barely remember what life felt like without its weight. We're going to find it. A cure for the pail, a way to set you free. Are we now? I promise I'll help you, Esther. I'll do anything I can. I mean it. We'll find a cure some way or another. I know we will. I wonder how she refills the doses, though. As grateful as she was to hear Sena's firm, determined words, her inner doubts refused to lift. It was too easy to believe in empty reassurances. Oftentimes, they only made the latest disappointment far worse than before. But she would never voice such thoughts to Sena. Thank you. Judging from how the smaller girl's features grew slightly crestfallen, Esther hadn't hidden her lack of faith as well as she thought. After a long moment, though, Sena composed herself again. Well, we've done quite a lot today for being stuck inside, haven't we? Even though we napped, I'm still so tired. You should sleep then. I'm tired too. You're probably right. I don't think I'd be of any more use reading these books tonight. At least the rain stopped. It should be a lovely fresh day tomorrow. I hope so anyway. Sena combed her fingers through her messy hair, letting out a sigh. Briefly, her gaze shifted over towards the watch still in Esther's hand. A flicker of worry and something almost like frustration reflected in her eyes. I hope you can rest well, Esther. I'll see you in the morning, alright? Esther nodded. Her fingers folded over the cold metal in her palm, masking it somewhat self-consciously. Thank you for the help again. Good night. No need to thank me. It was fun reading together, really. Well then, good night. With a gentle wave, she turned to make her way back upstairs like always. When she was gone, Esther pulled out her nightshirt and began to change, severing the loose and cozy warmth her new makeshift pajamas offered. She'd already settled into a comfortable bedtime routine, and part of her enjoyed pulling out her heavy blankets each night, making a pleasant nest for herself. I'm sorry. But somehow when she finally sat back down and clicked open her watch, it seemed all the more difficult to bring its syringe to her arm. It wasn't as if she had a choice. The needle sank in, just like always, bringing a moment of relief before a wave of nausea crashed down onto her and washed away any sense of comfort. Pulling it back with a shudder, she closed the watch as quickly as possible. Then, all but diving beneath her blankets, Esther curled herself tightly into a ball. "We find a cure some way or another. I know we will." If only it were easier to believe those strong, heartfelt words. If only she truly believed a cure existed at all. Achievement unlocked, Guardian. Alright. That's the second of 5 achievements. With an irritated click of his tongue, he threw his fine red quill onto the desk. Why am I wasting my time with such foolery? It's impossible. The root must lie in an imbalance of the humerus of the body's chemistry. How can this fanciful nonsense possibly be of any use to me? Desperation truly does drive every man to the metaphysical. Muttering to himself in exasperation, Isaiah rubbed a hand over his blurry eyes. It felt as if he was constantly throwing himself on an impossible task, wasting his time on a labor that would never bear any fruit. A disease that was better off simply managed instead of ever truly cured. That was what all the literature pointed to, and he was nearly at the point of believing it. But somehow, a little spark of hope always remained within him. As Isaiah leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifted over to the open window. He could see Sandra's small shape in a distant flower patch, running to and fro as she entertained herself with her usual games of make-believe. She was growing so fast, a little bean sprout determined to reach the sky. He'd have to tailor some new clothes for her before winter. Just as well, since he'd improved his sewing skills a great deal. It pleased him to sit and watch her at play. Such leisure was leisure was well deserved, since she'd performed excellently in her lessons today. Her intelligence at such a young age was certainly remarkable, though not wholly unexpected, since he had fathered her after all. Oh! Still, he found it difficult not to feel begrudgingly proud of the girl. She was already a voracious reader of the academic books he supplied her with, and although he had technically forbidden her from reading any of his grittier tomes of fiction, he pretended not to notice when they occasionally went missing. To his own surprise, Sandra's cleverness had motivated him to take up writing again. In less than a year, he'd compiled a highly detailed almanac for her, penned in a straighter style than his normal academic ramblings. Perhaps he would make several more, since he was still learning the way of a forester's life himself. It was very important to him that she learned to flourish alone, without relying on any urban comforts that would surely weaken her will. He wanted to impart as much of his knowledge to her as possible, in the hopes that absorbing it at an early age would help her always remain independent. As difficult as it would be for him to leave this world knowing so much of his work was still unfinished, as long as Sandra knew how to survive without him when that fateful day arrived, he'd finally be able to let go. How old is she at this point? A tightening, squeezing sensation in his chest jerked Isaiah back from his thoughts. Pushing back his chair, he rose swiftly to his feet. Slumping against his desk, Isaiah barely managed to catch himself in time. The muscles and tendons in his legs felt as if they'd atrophied, or else were impossibly strained beyond the point of exhaustion. Where is it? He reached out with a trembling hand, grasping around for the presence of a small cold bottle. Soon his fingers brushed against it, yanking the flask towards him. His medicine. The last dose hadn't been strong enough. Placing the uncorked bottle to his lips, he threw back the foul-tasting liquid. It stung the back of his throat, the sharpness of alcohol burning a path down to his stomach. But soon, as the tonic filtered through his system, he felt a modicum of strength returning to his lower body. Despite the powerful ache, at least he could move. For now. Oh, so he is one he can drink, though. Picking up the roughly hewn cane that leaned against his desk, Isaiah slowly crossed his study. But before he reaches his tastefully familiar bed, he paused, casting a sudden swift glance towards the window. She was still there, dancing, gathering flowers, waiting for him to finally step out and join her. Disappointed, no doubt, when another bedridden day came and went, playing alone as best as she could, never complaining, never crying, not once, as if she were immune to every crippling pang of sadness. Lowering himself onto his bed, he exhaled a long, weary sigh. This bit of frustration felt impossible to cling to for much longer. With each passing year, the strength of his will seemed to have weakened further and further. Every burst of indignation and determined pride was always matched by the depressive slump of the aftermath. No, he wouldn't give up. He couldn't give up. Not yet. But how much longer was this cycle sustainable? How much longer before his body and mind gave out altogether? There had to be an end, and yet all he could do was attempt to stave it off for as long as possible. Sena. Poor unlucky child. Mumbling to himself in a daze of exhaustion, he pressed his cheek against the pillow, staring into the wall with half-lidded eyes. A problem to which there was no solution, no exit other than to wait for sleep to come and relieve the burden for the rest of the day. Perhaps he would awaken with a little more energy, a little more inspiration, a little more hope. Or else it will all remain the same until the cycle started over once more. Oh, excuse me, I'm so sorry. For real though, after last week, I was literally unable to sneeze. And now it's coming back. It's a very weird feeling to like not be able to sneeze. It's also very weird to suddenly be able to sneeze again. Cool, crisp droplets coursed down at Esther's cheeks. The light breeze gently brushed past her face, turning the streaks of water into refreshingly cold trails that made her skin tingle. She shivered contentedly, swaying her feet in the water. Such a lovely morning. She couldn't remember ever seeing one like this in the city or anywhere else in her long travels. The stream's light bubbling, the bright sound of birds, the sunlight delicately reaching through the trees. It was hard not to feel like everything was right in the world. Ah, I found it! I found it, Esther, look! What did you find? Turning her head, Esther spotted a small figure running up alongside the stream. In one triumphantly raised hand, she clutched a long ribbon that fluttered in the air behind her. Thank you so much for the follow. Welcome. Phew. I can't believe it got so far down the street. Oh, hey, that's a new sprite. Sena finally came to a stop beside Esther, still holding out the ribbon as she panted slightly. You look like a fisherwoman showing off a prized catch. Do I? Oh, Esther, look. It's alive. I think it's trying to hop back into the stream. As the wind made her ribbon flutter and ripple, Sena gasped, holding on with both hands like it was about to pull her into the water. Oh no! Here, I'll help you. She rose to her feet, stepping over to grasp part of the ribbon. As if in response, the wind grew even livelier, making the thin strip of cloth dance frantically. Careful! This one is really strong! Don't let go, Esther. I'm counting on you. I won't. Don't worry. I've been training all my life for this. The next moment they both broke into a quiet fit of giggling, unable to stay serious any longer. That's cool. Cute. It had been a few weeks now since Esther had first arrived at the manor. The days seemed to fly by so quickly that she could barely keep track. Between working and playing together with Sena, every hour always felt well spent, without a single gap for boredom to seep into. Since she'd gotten so caught up in a new routine, however, Esther hadn't spent nearly as much time researching as she needed to. In fact, the only thing she'd done was skim over a few shelves, and the incomprehensible writing she found often left her disheartened. And after finishing her daily chores with Sena, she usually felt too tired to spend much time researching. But it was a pleasant tiredness, not the fatigue of those long, bad-ridden days she'd often had before. Earlier that morning, after they'd had their morning tea together, Sena had told her of the day's plans. First, they'd wash their clothes, then gather some flowers and herbs outside the manor grounds before heading off to the cemetery. It felt strange at first to wear her nightgown into the forest, but Esther soon forgot about it. She was looking forward to having fresh, clean clothes again, and the stream's clear waters easily carried away all the dirt. Of course, they carried away one of Sena's ribbons too, but luckily it now lay clasped between their fingers again. Oh, listen, at some point you definitely, do not care anymore. I also, if I go out to, throw away my trash and stuff, I also go out in my pajamas. I do not care. After they changed back into their dry clothes, the two girls set off towards the flower patch with their baskets. Slowly but surely, Esther had started growing more at ease in the deep forest. She no longer felt haunted by the anxious, worried feeling from when she'd first journeyed here, and the woods had seemed so daunting and unknowable. Of course, she didn't understand them half as well as Sena, and a part of her doubted that she ever would, but at least the towering trees no longer felt quite as lonely in their vastness. Vastnesses. Soon they reached the flower patch, its many blooms glimmering beneath the sun's radiance. It felt so warm and pleasant that Esther felt a strong desire to simply bask in it all. Unable to resist the urge, she lowered herself down, sprawling out amidst the flowers like a contented cat. Good idea. Sina lay down beside her, mimicking Esther's relaxed stretch. Do you get a CG for any of these? No. Sad. The gentle breeze slightly brushed over them, ruffling their freshly clean clothes and hair. It felt as divinely peaceful as any place could possibly hope to be, at a mansion that lay beyond all earthly worries and duties. For a long, euphoric moment, it seemed like every ounce of weight had lifted from Esther's body, and she was nothing more than a fragment of sunlight in the sky. Esther? After a few minutes, or perhaps many, Sena's voice drifted out of the unhurried silence. I was wondering, could you tell me more about the city? What your life is like there, I mean? The question caught Esther off guard. It pulled her back from her airy, dreamlike thoughts, tethering her to reality again. Since she started living with Sena, most of their conversation had been light and topical, and if anything, Sena had actually avoided asking about the city. But once her initial surprise had faded, she found a reply rising to her mind with unusual ease. Perhaps a part of her wanted to share more of her life with Sena. The city is static, efficient and industrial, but always the same. Academics and engineers say they're making advances every year, but in the end, life never really seems to change. It felt so strange to look back on her home now. Here, deep within the forest, those cold steel towers seemed like a distant fantasy, not something that even existed in the same world. There are people from different classes, the wealthy, the poor, and the in-between. They have very different lives and different senses of what's normal. But no matter how much money they have or don't have, everyone still suffers in their own ways. Getting a new device to keep track of time or warm the house changes things on the surface, but in the end, it never really helps people's pain. It only gives it a new name and in a different form. When Esther described the city like this to someone who'd never seen it, it sounded so bleak and hollow, a place no one would surely want to live in if they could help it. Was that how she truly felt too? No matter how much technology we have, none of it can help with finding a cure for the pale. We're as helpless against it as we were from the beginning. The only thing we can do is try and abate the symptoms. Esther's voice gradually trailed off into a subdued murmur. The breeze drifted over them again, carrying away the last traces of her words, but not the weight of futile hope they left behind. Something about the beautiful, clear sky brought a deep melancholy to her heart, a carefree purity above all sickness and despair, all the more lovely for how untouchable it was. The pale... I'm sorry, I don't really understand it very well. After a long pause, Sena finally spoke up again, sounding unusually shy and hesitant. Papa told me it affects everyone differently. Some people don't show many signs at all, but others are always very sick. What is it like for you, Esther? I mean, only if it's alright to ask. Although Sena hastily reassured her, Esther realized she didn't want to stay silent like she normally did when asked such a question. She'd never truly explained the feeling before, but now the desire to share with somebody almost overwhelmed her in its intensity. The pail came to me around 4 years ago. A few months after I lost a tournament, one that was very important to me. At first, when I started spending days in bed from exhaustion, I thought I had just caught a common illness. But after the days of tiredness kept stretching on, and no doctor could find anything wrong with my body, I realized what it really was. Severe depression. For me, the pail, it's like a parasite. I can feel it inside me, draining my energy, stealing my mind away from things I want to do or focus on. There are good days and bad ones, but sometimes even speaking feels like it's impossible. The medicine helps, but it feels like it's gotten less and less effective since I started taking it. Fingers drifted to the small puncture spot beneath her sleeve where the flesh had grown slightly discolored and permanently tender. Since she'd started injecting herself, Esther always wore long sleeves to hide the mark, even when it grew warm outside. Back when I was studying at the academy, I struggled with the pail for my last 3 years. The teachers who had mentored me, the ones who'd always doted on me, I saw them pull away when I realized I couldn't accomplish anything anymore. Even my friends there started separating from me, thinking I was somebody who'd only drag them down. My results slipped more and more, and by the time I finished, I'd lost any chance at becoming the researcher I dreamt of being. I didn't want to go back and study more or start an apprenticeship for another trade that I would only fail at. My parents kept telling me that I should settle for simple work or find someone who'd support me, but I hated both of those ideas. I wanted to make my own life. I promised them I'd find a cure for myself within a year, or at least something that would help my symptoms more than the medicine did. But even though I searched far and wide and met many different people and saw many kinds of advanced medicine, nothing worked for me. As she spoke, her mind flitted back to her many travels, the odd jobs she'd worked, the fascinating books she'd found in old libraries, the doctors and shamans who came from such varied walks of life, and how restless she felt now looking back on those times. Every time I thought I found something and I started latching onto hope for a cure, it always ended up as another empty promise. And now, the year I've given myself is almost over. I could keep searching, but I don't have the will to continue after so much failure, finished her thought in her head. Something she couldn't bring herself to say aloud. I need to go back home. I don't want to abandon my parents, and I can't keep wandering forever. I had my chance and I failed. Then I have to move on. Esther did her very best to make her voice sound firm and resolute, but she couldn't keep a note of sorrow from sinking in at the end. No matter how hard she tried to tell herself otherwise, the prospect of returning home filled her with dread. So the rumor about Papa's research, that was your last hope? Yes. When Sena finally questioned her after a long pause, Esther bit her lower lip briefly. I don't want to go back to my parents empty-handed. I don't want to tell them I lost. A somber, heavy silence weighed over them, out of place among the beautiful skies and singing birds. Esther felt guilty for sharing such dark thoughts with her friend, but at the same time, it lessened her burden a little when she voiced them, no matter how hopeless the situation was. She could tell Sena was truly listening to what she said, and her quiet sympathy brought Esther more relief than she expected. Esther, whether or not you find something in Papa's research, you haven't lost it all. Rising up into a sitting position, Sena hugged her knees to her chest, gazing intently down at Esther. You fought so hard and traveled so much and never stopped searching, even when it seemed hopeless. Most people would just give up with symptoms like yours. If the doctors can't discover a cure, how could anyone else ever hope to find one? Yet here you are, still looking everywhere you can, doing everything you possibly can do. Because you want to love your life, don't you? You'll never be happy just sitting around, struggling on for no reason. After firm, gentle, chiding words, a smile started to soften Seina's features. She studied Esther with eyes that seemed far more perceptive than most people Esther had met in the city or elsewhere. When I look at you, I just get this feeling that, more than anything else, you hate giving up. And even if there's no cure and all you've done really did end up being in vain, you can still prove everyone who doubted you was wrong. You can research, you can explore, you can work, really, you can do anything you want, even if they try to tell you otherwise. It's just that you need a reason for it, one you can truly believe in. Don't you think so, Esther? Reaching out, she took Esther's hands in her own smaller ones, giving them a reassuring squeeze. Then with a faint huff of exertion, Seina rose to her feet, pulling Esther up alongside her. You're a strong girl, Esther. Why, someone would have to be blind if they couldn't see that. That's why I know the pair won't win against you in the end. Really, how could it? You're very stubborn about things. I mean, stubborn in a good way. So that's why I think you have a better chance of curing yourself than anybody. You find something, I know you will. But like I told you before, I'll help you in any way I can, no matter what, I promise. Maybe it was a light, cheerfully confident way Seina reassured her, or perhaps Esther had just always wished she could hear those words. Whatever the reason, it felt like she was speaking the truth. Unlike the empty optimism that so many people passed around, Seina always seemed to genuinely believe in what she was saying. It made it that much easier for Esther to believe her, too, at least in part, if not yet fully. You're too kind to me, Seina. That's a silly thing to say. How could anyone ever be too kind? Very easily. I don't think I believe you. Besides, it's not kindness. I'm just telling the truth, that's all. No. Half exasperated, half overcome with affection, she picked up the smaller girl in a tight hug. She was light enough that Esther could swing her around a little, ruffling the flowers around them. Seina squealed in delight, wriggling her feet as she flung her arms around Esther's neck. They'd grown comfortable enough over the past weeks to play and poke fun at each other, always in a good-spirited fashion, and it brought no small amount of joy to Esther's heart when she made her friend laugh. By the time she set Seina down again, Esther's grim mood had mostly lifted. There were still a few tasks left to finish too, which helped distract her from the unpleasant, ever-looming prospect of returning home. Oh, cemetery. After they'd each picked a large basket full of flowers, she followed Seina to the cemetery, where they set about adorning all the graves. It was a solemn and yet unexpectedly pleasant task, one that always put her into a reflective mood. Perhaps it was more for the sake of the living than the dead, but it still felt as if they were doing something important. As Esther passed by the mausoleum, however, an unexpected shiver ran down her spine. I did not forget that we found a key in the middle of the forest, by the way, and I would bet money that this key fits into the door here, and I want her to try it out. She didn't know why, but something about that place. It seemed to be beckoning to her. That's not good. Why exactly an eerie mausoleum would be beckoning to her, she had no idea. It was just her persistent curiosity, most likely, since the doors were shut and locked tight. Perhaps someday she'd get to wander inside, although the interior would probably be far more disappointing in reality. Has she forgotten about the key? Seems like it. This is the second time they allude to the mausoleum in the first place, but the key has not been mentioned again. It was still late afternoon when the two girls finally returned to the manor. Since they'd finished their chores earlier than normal, Esther found herself with an unexpected amount of energy left over. She decided to visit the study and comb through Morphy-sized difficult writings, which required quite a bit of effort to focus on. After wishing Esther luck, Seina went off to clean the manor's lower level, suggesting she come down for dinner once it grew dark. Ooh. Despite the relatively short time she'd spent in the study over the past few weeks, its unusual atmosphere bothered her less than before. The lonely, dusty feeling hanging over the room was almost comforting in a way. Though, now that she knew about Isai's disappearance, something about it still set her on edge. Maybe he's in the mausoleum. And dead. After going through the dusty tomes for a while, Esther managed to roughly work out the next era of Isaiah's writings. Chronologically, they'd moved next to another shelf full of writings on spirits and metaphysical research. He collected an impressive amount of very old books, fragile to the point that Esther feared they might crumble in her hands. After shuffling through a few uninteresting entries, she stumbled upon another one that mentioned Sena. Lifting it up to the light, she curiously began to read. Despite the constant efforts of my research, I feel as if my faith in a cure is waning. The same medicine that abates most symptoms, a tincture of blood, alcohol, and essence of nepenthes, also creates a dangerous dependency. I doubt that suppressing effects could ever lead to permanent satisfactory results. Attempting to study the pale symptoms, either on myself or records of past victims, is a bitter struggle. Even within one person, they are painfully elusive and volatile. While some sufferers live relatively normal lives, others are so crippled by fatigue that they can barely function. Many individuals, if not most, seem to move between these two states with surprising regularity. Then, even more bafflingly, there are cases where the sickness miraculously disappears. The normal iris color returns and the patient's lethargy vanishes. How do you say this? Wouldn't it be with a long E or something? Like, because lethargic? So lethargy? Lethargy? 1 second. Lethargy, okay. Got them. Of course, this rarely occurs overnight. In most occurrences, it takes years for such a change to happen and often coincides with strange, unique events in the individual's life. All of this apparent randomness frustrates me to no end, and no prior researcher has ever been able to trace the common thread between those who are cured. Foolish as it is, I cannot help but question whether something beyond a mere biological affliction lies at the heart of this disease. I find myself returning again and again to the metaphysical, and in particular, the numerous incarnations of those unknowable entities, the Psalmovet. A particular strain of them, known as the Arafel by most, appear in my literature with various fearful mentions. Such superstition strikes me as beyond foolish, but I must admit the mystique inflames my ever-insatiable curiosity. I know this line of research will inevitably end in further disappointment, but for now, at least it preoccupies my mind in place of other burdens. Like the matter of this troublesome child, of course. She was to have her mother's name originally, but I am not so cruel as to let that curse remain with her. Thus I have given the girl a new name, Sena. Something about the sound of it matches the blinding sparkle of her oppressively endless energy. Children are such baffling creatures, truly. I had forgotten just how innocently every life begins its journey, even those who one day become the most irredeemable of corrupted souls. Aww. Tracing her fingers lightly along the parchment's edge, Esther mulled over the meaning of what she'd read. Had Isaiah really given up on a scientific cure? He seemed to share her skepticism of the supernatural, but exasperation must have driven him to it as a last resort. It disappointed her, though she could understand where he was coming from. When something had no apparent explanation, it was natural to start wondering if a god or otherworldly force hadn't played a hand, attempting to send a signal or a message through indirect means. But to attribute an entire disease to such forces. She gave a firm shake of her head. Hopefully, Isaiah had eventually left this line of research for something more practical. Otherwise, all of her searching here would only lead to another dead end. For now, though, she needed to follow his train of thought, scanning through everything in case a stray lead popped up anywhere. Carrying a stack of books and papers over to the window desk, Esther did her best to pore over them thoroughly. Beyond Isaiah's occasional dry remarks on Sena's growth and education, however, the only things he'd written about were his metaphysical studies and continuously fading experiments. In a way, she could empathize with his ever-increasing despair and frustration all too well. When it finally grew too dark to read and her focus began waning alongside the sunlight, Esther remembered Sena's suggestion. It was a good thing the other girl was around to remind her to eat, as she often forgot about meals during the day. Mood. Putting away her books, she hurried downstairs, where Sena had just finished cleaning the parlor. Over a meal of delicious quinoa curry, Esther shared her finds with her friend, who listened intently to every word. After a thoughtful pause, Sena agreed with Esther's belief that her father's supernatural studies likely never led him anywhere. And yet, despite her words, she seemed more hesitant than usual. Perhaps she knew something Esther didn't. If it was anything concrete, though, surely she would have shared it instead of keeping quiet. Though, naturally, there was nothing concrete about the supernatural to begin with. I just hope he didn't, resort to human experiments or something. We've been really productive today, haven't we? Laundry, gardening, tending the graves, cleaning, researching. Isn't it nice? I always feel so lovely after a good day of work. It does feel nice. I didn't have many of these days back when I lived in the city. Oh, that makes sense. If you barely have the energy to move, of course you can't do much that day, and I'm sure being stuck in bed only makes you feel worse. She seemed to understand Esther easily, and more quickly than expected. No doubt because she'd seen her father in the same state before. I haven't had to worry about it since I came here. Maybe it's the fresh air. She offered a casual shrug, but deep down she felt thoroughly grateful for the reprieve. Over the course of a few weeks in the city, she would have had long periods of nearly catatonic fatigue, stretching up to 3 or 4 days at a time. However, since she'd arrived at the manor, Esther hadn't experienced a single one of those debilitating days. It almost seemed too good to be true. Well, whatever it is, I'm so happy that you felt better here. You looked a lot worse when you first arrived, but since then you really seem different somehow. It's hard to describe. Brighter, maybe. More engaged? Less boring to be around, you mean? That is definitely not what I meant. I wouldn't be offended if you just said it. You were never boring, so I'm not going to say it. You are a real jester now, though, apparently. Does that make you the queen? Yes, the queen of flowers, potatoes, and lentils, probably. Do most queens eat the subjects? Listen, they're quite happy to serve and to be served, I hope. As much as Esther tried to keep a straight face, she couldn't keep from snickering at Sena's retort. The smaller girl beamed brightly in response, evidently quite pleased that she'd been able to break Esther's deadpan expression. Well, I think this jester could use some rest. My legs are very sore. Agreed. We both deserve a good long sleep, don't we? Yawning contentedly, Sena gave Esther a small side hug before stepping back, her eyes sparkling with satisfied drowsiness. Good night. I'll see you in the morning like always. Good night, Sena. A faint smile crossed her features as she watched the smaller girl trot towards the stairs. It brought her comfort to know they had a routine together, the first real routine she'd had since she left home. Except, of course, for her one nightly ritual. After putting her blankets on the couch and changing clothes, Esther sat down with a silver timepiece clutched in her palm. Blood, alcohol, and essence of Nepenthes. Nepenthes! Isaiah had mentioned them in his journal. Her watch held the letter too inside its case, but by injecting the tonic directly into her veins, it allowed a small amount of ingredients to last a very long time. She'd had it refilled at the last city she visited, but it would last her at least a few more weeks. Oh, that's good to know. A few more weeks. No matter what, she would have to return home by then. Whether or not she found a cure, she couldn't stay here. That much was for certain. But someday, perhaps she could still come back. With a bittersweet thought lingering in her mind, Esther took her injection in a daze, clicking the watch shut in her palm once it was finished. Getting to sleep, however, proved more difficult than she thought. Despite her tiredness, she kept tossing and turning on the sofa, unable to get particularly comfortable. An image kept drifting through her mind, but whenever she tried to focus and put a name to it, the thought disappeared. As she struggled to cling to that elusive vision, exhaustion finally won out, pulling her down into a deep slumber. The last thing she could remember was a sudden, strange question that surfaced from her subconscious. What if everything is not as it seems? Oh no. Oh no, bro. Please don't have any sudden jump scares or anything. I know the game has a few like smaller horror-ish. Like they literally have a warning at the beginning of the game that's like, oh, please be careful. It has mentions of like death, blah blah blah, a small horror sequence. But like I'm thinking the entire experience here itself is a little horror-ish. That's not a word. I don't know why I keep saying it's not really a word. Because like, mansion in the middle of nowhere. We're dying. We don't really know what's happening. Thank you for the pad. Isn't that already horror enough? Please don't give me a jump scare. Thank you for the ID time. And the posture check. He was an idiot. A complete and utter fool. A true laughingstock of a man. What kind of insecure weakling would start questioning himself over something like this? It meant nothing. It didn't matter. He didn't really truly care. Oh no, what's happening? But as a pair of familiar footsteps rushed up the stairs, approaching his office with pure excitement, he felt more sickeningly nervous than before any presentation he had ever given at the academy. Oh, what's happening?
Papa! I'm here, Papa. May I come in?
Yes, you may. The next moment his door flung open. A tiny figure came running up to where he was seated by the window, bouncing on her toes and clapping her hands together lightly.
I want to see it, Papa. Oh, please, please, I want to see the gift you promised.
Oh. Very well. Sit here quietly for a moment and cover your eyes.
I will. I won't peek, I promise.
Lifting up onto his lap, he watched Zaina sternly as she buried her face in her hands. Her fingers were tightly squeezed together. She seemed to be holding true to her word. With a long, quiet exhale, Isaiah slowly began to reach for the window curtain. There was a small lump hidden behind the fabric, and after pausing hesitantly, he pulled it out into the open. What is it? He'd been staring at this thing so much, it barely looked like anything to him now. The project first started months ago. He'd read several books, drawn up numerous diagrams, and of course, had gone through many failed attempts. His first iterations looked like a type of monstrosities to come shambling through one's nightmares. The later ones began to improve, but he still wasn't satisfied. Like with tailoring, his perfectionism forced him to work and work until his skills were, at the very least, consistently average instead of laughably amateur. And now, here was the peak of his unimpressive results staring back at him with its beady eyes. His hand began to shake slightly. She might hate it. He'd have to watch as her face fell in disappointment before she tried to put on a smile to make him happy. But that wouldn't hide how ugly she thought it was.
Papa, can I open my eyes yet?
Yeah, wait, not yet. Hold on a moment. Keep your eyes very, very tightly closed, but take your hands off your face.
Like this?
Yes, now hold out your hands.
Okay, here they are.
Aww. Biting his lip, he slowly pushed a small fuzzy white present into Sena's outstretched hands. Her fingers instinctively curled in to grasp it, holding the creature aloft in the air.
Can I open them now, Papa?
Yes. What is it? A plushie? A cat plushie. Oh, that's cute. As Sena's eyes finally flickered open, Isaiah watched her intently for a reaction. A look of pure speechless shock spread across her features. She didn't even blink. She just stared wide-eyed, her mouth falling open. He was right. She hated it. What do you mean? She couldn't even hide how terrible she thought it was. He was a fool to attempt such a silly thing. It would have been better to make her new clothes or get her a new book or craft some more tools for the kitchen.
A kitty, my own kitty. And she's so pretty and so soft. I love her, Papa. I love her so much.
Tears overflowed into her cheeks. She giggled delightedly in between little sobs, as if the emotion was too strong for her mind to work out how she felt. Oh, well, there's no need to cry. Not if you're happy with it, I mean.
But you made her, didn't you, Papa? You made her just for me?
I put it together in a bit of spare time, yes.
That's why I'm crying, silly. Because you made it just like her, for me. And now I always have both of you.
Oh, are you telling me they had a cat? Like an actual cat and that one died or something? Just like who? Turning his head away slightly, Isaiah swallowed down the irksome lump forming in the back of his throat. He certainly didn't see the need to make such a fuss over it. Still, it relieved him that she recognized what the toy was supposed to be, at least. Recently, they spotted a few small forest cats around the manor, although the little creatures never dared to come very close. Sena always gazed at them longingly, her eyes sparkling at the sight of the fluffy fur and tails. But whenever Isaiah offered to bring back a pet from the city, she always refused.
It's too cruel. Animals should always be free.
He tried to explain that it would still be quite free, and probably live a better life than as a city stray, but Sena didn't seem to be having any of it. It frustrated him, especially since it was so thoroughly obvious that she longed to hold one of those forest cats. So he done his best to replicate a favorite of them all, the tiny white creature that peered at them from behind the trees while they worked in the garden. Oh, okay, at least the other cat is not dead, oh my god. Cradling the cat in her arms, Sena curled up against his chest, still sniffling. She almost never cried, which was why Isaiah felt completely at a loss for how to respond. He gave her head a few hesitant, gentle pats before letting his palm rest atop her mane of wavy hair. The tears would stop by themselves. Eventually. Probably. Happy birthday, Sena. Shall we go make your favorite breakfast?
Yes, please.
Wiping her eyes with one sleeve, she tilted her head up to nod at him with another sniffle. Very well then. Ah, and do your best not to get any berry juice on a cat. A stain like that won't come out for centuries.
No, I won't get any on her. I'll keep her safe, you see.
I know you will. Don't do that to me! Isaiah rose to his feet, holding his small daughter in one arm without much effort. She kept the cat snuggled against her chest as he carried both of them towards the door, marching purposefully towards the kitchen. So he hadn't disappointed her after all. For some reason that made him feel the happiest he'd been in a long, long time. How funny that he should be so contented over something so trivial and mundane, so insignificant compared to his research discoveries. What a strange, soft old man he was becoming these days. But it couldn't be helped. It's good! It's good! You are very much still human. Achievement unlocked for my days. You care for your daughter very much. That is very sweet. I'm very happy that he's improving like this, because his initial thing of the whole like, oh my god, I have a child. What do with child? Was not nice. The fire danced in front of her like always, casting a warm flickering light across the floor. Esther sipped her tea, gazing into the flames contemplatively. How long had she been here now exactly? It felt like years somehow. Perhaps it was because Sena had welcomed her so warmly, without any judgment or expectations. Sena understood her better than anyone else, even though they'd known each other only a short time. And she never needed anything from Esther, only her company and support. Sena, where was she? She'd gone upstairs a little while ago to fetch something, but it seemed strange that she was taking this long. Lost in her own thoughts, Esther hadn't noticed how much time had passed. Oh god, the music is eerie! Fidgeting in her seat, she shot a glance towards the stairwell. It was foolish to get so worried like this. Sena had just gotten distracted by something upstairs. But it couldn't hurt to go check on her, could it? Once she'd made sure that Sena was perfectly fine, Esther could slink back down to wait again. That was all she needed to do. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Managing to convince herself it was the right decision, Esther crept upstairs. A strange feeling of guilt came over her, as if she were doing something terrible by doubting her friend, even though it didn't make any rational sense. Ooh! Looking, no, you know what I hate though? I hate these kind of screens where you're looking into a room and you only see a part of it. Because no matter like what kind of genre of game it is that you're playing, I always fear, like even if it's not a horror game, I always fear that something is going to jump out like from one corner of the screen, like no matter how little I guess animations an indie visual novel might have. Maybe they put like a bunch of effort in to make it look like there's something running towards you or something just flashing on the screen, being like, "Bwah." I'm always scared that's going to happen. Please don't let it happen here. I will cry. I will genuinely cry. But the guilt only grew more intense as she approached Zaina's bedroom, drawn to the flick of light from beneath the door.
I really can't stand this anymore. I wish you were here, Papa. You can handle things a lot better than I can.
Sitting on the edge of the bed, Zaina heaved a huge sigh, her gaze wistfully trained up towards the ceiling. Confused, Esther stepped closer, peering through the cracked door at her. I don't like this!
It's just... She's just so difficult all the time. She doesn't know how to cook or clean. I'm running out of stored food with all these meals for two. And she never speaks. How can I deal with someone who's so boring?
Hey! Hey! She froze. Zaina's frustrated, distraught words echoed hollowly in her ears, sinking into her chest like a knife.
I really wish she would leave. I'd rather just have you, Papa. I was so much happier the way things were before. What should I do? I don't even want to go back downstairs to her.
She sighed again, kicking her feet lightly in the air before leaning back on the bed with a soft groan. Oh, yikes! Well, that's not horror, but that's also... Ow. Esther stared at her for a moment longer, completely stunned. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, and yet... In a way, she had always wondered if Zaina's true feelings were like this. It wasn't like she could blame her. She'd never deserved Zaina's kindness and hospitality to begin with. And if Zaina would be happier without her, it would be best to just get out of the way. Oh, ouch. Oh, don't leave in the middle of the night though. You're gonna get lost and die. She barely felt the chilling night air as it enveloped her body. Instead, a numbness spread through her, dulling even the sensation of the ground beneath her feet. It took a moment to even realize that she'd started moving, her legs carrying her somewhere of their own accord. It didn't really matter as long as she was leaving that place forever, a place she never should have entered to begin with. Aimless and without any focused thought, Esther wandered across the dark clearing. On the surface, she seemed to be in a hypnotic trance, but the truth was slightly different. Letting go of any responsibility, any sense of self-preservation or fear, she allowed her body to stumble wherever it wished. She was rewarded with a pleasant, weightless feeling, freed from all her thoughts and anxiety. A ghostly trance, devoid of any purpose, only following the invisible current that carried her along. In that moment, Esther realized that she had become truly, completely, hopelessly powerless. And she welcomed the relief of her burden with a grateful sigh. Oh, don't do it! Ah! After several minutes or hours, perhaps, a small sea of grey headstones greeted Esther from the dark. As she drifted past them, she felt none of the uneasiness that had gripped her before. Instead, it almost seemed like she was returning home, to somewhere she belonged, back into the embrace of familiar friends. They beckoned her forward, drawing her in closer and closer, leading her towards the sole structure that rose among the trees. Oh, okay, but are you going to try out the key now? And then, two stone doors were gazing back at her. At first, a dark confusion gripped Esther. Why? What was she doing here? Hadn't there been something dangerous about this place? But as those thoughts welled in her mind... Oh. Suddenly, a beautiful, longing warmth reached out for her. Something that wanted her, wanted to protect her, arms that she could fall back into. All she had to do was follow them. Hold on. The doors drifted open for her, revealing a dark passage into the mausoleum. And yet, with that golden light still calling out so sweetly, her first tingle of fear quickly dissipated into nothingness. Once she was inside, Esther heard the doors gently close behind her again. Oh, I don't like this. But instead of unnerving her, the thought only brought her more comfort. Now there would be no temptation to return, no going back to such a wrong place. She followed the angelic summons deeper, heading down through a maze of peacefully sleeping bodies. The further she went, the more a sense of impending relief swelled before her, promising deliverance from the pain she hadn't even recognized before. She was so helpless now, and only complete surrender could wash all of her suffering away. What is that? So close to releasing her grasp on everything. So close to a golden light that awaited her right around the corner, waiting to relieve her of that last bitter hope that anchored her in grief. She would be free. Oh, I don't like it. I don't want to look. She would be free. Esther! Esther, Esther, please wake up! Esther! It was a dream! She dragged the right drawing in a choked gasp. Sweat pooled in her shirt and dripped from her forehead onto her cheeks. Esther! To her surprise, Sena threw herself forward in a sudden hug, not seeming to mind that Esther was all but drenched. The small arms clung tightly about her neck, and she could feel Sena giving her a reassuring squeeze. What happened? You must have been having a horrible nightmare. I heard you crying out from upstairs and I came down to see you shuddering here. After she drew back, Sena gazed at Esther with obvious worry, biting her lower lip. You'd thrown off all the blankets, but you were soaked in sweat. I thought you had a fever. As the shock of her dream faded, a sense of sheepishness overtook her relief from waking up. I'm sorry I made you worry. It was only a bad dream. I'm not sick. For whatever reason, she found herself hesitating as she reassured Sena. The medicine. Since she started taking it, her sleep was rarely peaceful, although she had never woken in such a state before. Esther, do you want to sleep upstairs with me? What? The bed I use is really big, so there's plenty of room, but you might feel less scared if you had someone else nearby. Maybe you're afraid when you fall asleep all alone in this dark room. I wonder if her seeing her on the bed was a dream as well. Or if it's genuinely her thoughts and she massively dislikes us being here. I cannot tell right now. A deep concern shone in Sena's eyes, but something else seemed present in her anxious words. Something that almost sounded like guilt, though Esther had no idea why she would possibly feel guilty. Only if having me around wouldn't bother you? I think I probably toss and turn in my sleep all the time. Ah, my poor Esther, you have a lot of nightmares? Esther slowly nodded. Well, you don't need to worry about me. I'm a really heavy sleeper. I only heard you because I woke up to drink some water. Come, let's go upstairs. I'll get you another of Papa's shirts. You shouldn't stay in that one. It's so damp. I hate that feeling when you wake up in the middle of the night and you're all sweaty. I hate that. Taking Esther's hand, Sena led her out of the living room, starting up her usual stream of airy chatter. In the wake of her unnerving dream, it was soothing to hear Sena's bubbling words. They helped to block out the lingering echo of the cold, harsh rejection still resonating in Esther's mind, even if they couldn't completely erase it. Hi, good evening. How are you doing? After they reached the bedroom, Sena gave her another of Isaiah's black shirts and left to go fold the sofa's blankets while Esther changed. A few minutes later, the two girls were sleepily crawling onto the soft bed, eager to escape from the cold night air. Unlike the sofa, there was plenty of room to be had, and Esther gratefully stretched out beneath the sheets. Good night, Esther. Yuki, you just woke up from a nap. It's 10 minutes to 10 p.m. Yeah, same here. We're in the same time zone, I think. We should be in the same time zone, but I hope the nap was good. These two are just about to go back to sleep because one of them woke up from a nightmare.
If you have another bad dream, I'll be here. Just wake me up, alright?
Alright. Sleep well, Sena.
You too.
With that, they both fell silent. Sena shifted a few times, then let out a contented exhale before growing still. It was long before Esther heard her breathing settle into a slow, steady rhythm, signaling that she'd already fallen asleep. But we won't be able to fall asleep, will we? Rolling over onto a bag, Esther exhaled a grim, quiet sigh. Certainly this bed was far cozier than the couch, thanks to both the comfortable mattress and Sena's reassuring presence nearby. But despite Esther's deep tiredness, her mind refused to let her sleep again so easily. She lay awake in silence, staring into space with her eyes half open, repeating the vivid events of her dream.
Is this a horror? I don't think it is. At least I don't think it is supposed to be.
It's tagged as gothic dark fantasy. Dark and cute, but to be fair, those are like the weird Steam tags that are never really wait, the people who made it themselves, they put the genre as gothic fantasy, drama, and horror though. Okay. A little horror. The Dark Souls is tagged as cute and Steam. Yeah, the Steam tags are stupid. I guess like it's like a very atmospheric horror, sure, but we haven't like seen anything outright scary, I gotta say. At least I don't feel like we haven't seen anything outright scary yet, so. The memory of her words haunted Esther. As foolish as it was, she couldn't help but wonder if her nightmare mirrored reality. Perhaps there was some semblance of truth, even if the real Sena would never be so blunt about her feelings. She might resent Esther, but not admit it to herself consciously. Maybe she secretly hoped Esther would leave and was just too embarrassed to tell her directly. Because of how kind Sena was, it was impossible to know if she was just masking her unhappiness for Esther's sake. Like the whole plot here is our main girl, Esther, she's suffering from a disease called the Pale, which makes her going to, like her specifically, it differs from person to person apparently, but her into like very lethargic bouts where she will be bedridden, she can't move, she can't work. She's trying to find a cure for it. She set herself a goal of like traveling, and because there's no cure for it yet, seeing if she can find anything, because she didn't want to give up. And she stumbled upon this mansion in the middle of nowhere because there was a rumor of some guy researching a cure here as well, but the guy has disappeared and the only one still living here is his daughter. She's letting us stay here and letting us look into his notes, see if we find anything. And now we had a really big nightmare because we overheard her thinking aloud to herself of how annoying it is that we're here, we're running out of food, blah blah blah. And now she's not sure if the other girl really resents us or if it was just something her brain told her. What confused her most though was the mausoleum. Why had she been drawn to it like that? In the real world, the place unnerved her and she didn't even want to get close to it. But in the dream, it had called out to her so beautifully, promising freedom from a pain she didn't even realize she had. Thank you for it for any time. I realize it's quite hard to join in on lots of my streams because I will be in the middle of a super story heavy game. I mean, it's a kinetic visual novel. There's nothing here except for me reading. And you're just being like, I have no idea what's happening, but I also don't want to ask because I don't want to bother anyone. But like, feel free to ask me anytime. I'm glad to explain it. That's why we're playing these games. Something else puzzled her too. Sena said she cried out in her sleep, but Esther couldn't remember any sharp fear in the dream. There had been nothing that frightened or attacked her, which made it odd that she'd awoken in a cold sweat. If anything, the last part of her dream was almost pleasant. Perhaps she really had suffered a brief fever, an unknown side effect of the medicine, or else her subconscious was hiding something from her waking self. As she emerged from her brooding thoughts, Esther suddenly noticed a weight on her arm. Startled, she glanced downward, her eyes swiftly widening at what she saw. Yeah, baby! Listen, I complained that we did not get a CG for the whole frolicking around in the flower field, but nice. Sina had curled up against her, clutching Esther like an oversized stuffed animal. She seemed fast asleep. Her movements must have been unconscious. A warm sensation bloomed in her chest.
That's what we're talking about.
I adore the art style so much. The reason I initially looked into this game in the first place was because of the art style. It's like every few weeks I will just scroll through the visual novel tag and see what the fuck is going on. Sina looked so small, so innocent, so calm compared to her normal self.
Well, thank you for the hydrate time.
If someone managed to understand Cafe Enchanted, joining in the middle, the roots are pretty good to understand. True. The good thing about Cafe Enchanted was, like, aside, from the initial setup, pretty much everything is contained to its own, to like one route. So it's like you could have absolutely missed out on one guy's route, like fully, properly, doesn't matter, because next guy's route will have that guy not even show up because they're not connected at all in that one. But since this one is a completely contained story, I think it's a little hard to completely catch up on. As strong as she was, she seemed as defenseless as a small kitten in the arms of sleep. She trusted Esther enough to let all of her guard fall to the wayside, utterly at peace while next to her friend. It stirred in Esther a longing to protect the smaller girl no matter the cost. Aww. Closing her eyes, she felt her body finally begin to relax, lulled back to sleep by Sena's comforting presence. Her arm was bent at a slightly uncomfortable angle, but she didn't dare move. Not while Sena was sleeping so soundly. Soon she hardly noticed it at all, her thoughts fading away into pleasant nothingness, until an untroubled sleep finally drifted over her. Aw, nice. That's good. As much as I love it, I wish the sun wasn't so bright today. When she heard Sina murmuring softly to herself, Esther turned to face the other girl. They were out gathering flowers on a warm afternoon, with most of the chores already behind them. Since that morning, though, Sina had been acting a little less energetic than usual. Oh no! You think she's also getting sick? Are you alright, Sina? You're not ill, are you?
Ill? Oh, no, I'm not ill. It's only just a headache. I get them sometimes, but I don't know why.
Sina glanced downward as she mumbled her reply, as if confessing her pain made her feel embarrassed. You should go lie down then. I can take care of the cemetery.
No, I really don't need to. I can keep working. You shouldn't have to do it alone.
It's fine, Sina. There's not much left. Rest and the headache will go away sooner.
Also, you're gonna give me a reason or a possibility to check out the mausoleum if you're not here.
She groaned softly in protest, pursing her lips together for a moment.
Alright, I will, but only because you're so stubborn about it, Esther. I'll see you inside soon, alright? Please don't work too hard.
That's slightly hypocritical advice coming from you, isn't it?
Esther, did I punch you in your sleep or something? You're ruthless today.
I have to be ruthless to make you take care of yourself.
Well, that's not something I ever expected to hear.
Pursing her lips in a pout, Sena prodded her finger playfully against Esther's side, and the two of them broke into light giggling.
Alright, let me check out that thing.
When the other girl turned and left for the manor, Esther felt relieved in a way. Recently, Sena had been looking after her so much it almost made her uncomfortable. She jumped at any opportunity she had to even slightly repay the favor, though it never seemed like enough. Anything to keep the dream from becoming reality, she thought grimly. Clutching a basket of flowers in one hand and her broom in the other, Esther made her way along the path Sena had shown her. Despite her poor sleep, she felt curiously energized today. Speaking was less challenging, and her body responded to her wishes more willingly than normal, like a weight was temporarily lifted from her shoulders. She'd truly come to enjoy working outside, especially on days like these, days when the forest felt like it accepted her somehow. I don't know. I'm just deeply uncomfortable with the fact that the cemetery seems to house so many graves. And yet, Sena does not know who any of these people are? I don't believe that. But despite her newfound comfort, there was still one place that sent an uncontrollable shiver down her spine as soon as she entered it. The cemetery. No matter how many times she visited this place with Sena, she could never shake the odd, unsettling sensation it gave her. It was all in her head, most likely. After all, Sena didn't seem to feel the same atmosphere if her easy smiles were anything to go by. But even more strangely, Esther felt an indescribable pull towards this place. Almost as if something was waiting for her. Something she didn't know, something she didn't want to know, but was being slowly led to uncover. A secret, deeply buried. One that was surely better off that way. Okay, make it sound even more suspicious. As she finished tending to the last of the graves, Esther's gaze finally drifted towards a single lonesome spot she had avoided. The grim shape of the mausoleum, its doors tightly shut like a stone wall. There was no reason to bother with it. It's locked, Sena had said. I don't think I'll ever find the key. Is it though? You never tried the door, she only said it's locked. Despite her attempts at rationalizing with herself, a powerful urge swept over Esther. She cautiously approached the stone structure, half expecting a repeat of her dream somehow. And like before though, the door seemed tightly shut, and when she tugged at one of the handles to no avail, it confirmed her suspicions. You have a key. In between the ornate slabs of stone, Esther noticed a small, almost imperceptible slot. The keyhole, no doubt. And a key of matching size would be incredibly difficult to find if it truly was lost somewhere. You picked up a key! Weeks ago! At the beginning of the fucking... Thank you! Right as that thought crossed her mind, Esther froze. Impossible. There was simply no chance. The likelihood of such a coincidence was practically zero. Even though she fully understood it, she still couldn't control the sudden, intense desire to try. Slowly, hesitantly, her hand drifted downward, feeling for her skirt pocket. Sure enough, a small bump still rested there. Uh-oh. The key would fit perfectly. She knew before she even tried it. She could feel a pull between them somehow. And sure enough, as soon as she slid it into the lock, the door echoed with a low, ominous click. As if she'd been burned, Esther jerked her hand back. It took her a moment to realize that she was trembling uncontrollably. Strangely enough, she didn't understand why. It was like an irresistible lure pulled her towards the mausoleum, and at the same time, every fiber of her body screamed at her to run away. For now, the latter instinct won out. Hastily locking the doors again, she pushed the key back into her skirt. She could investigate the interior some other time, and preferably while not alone. No! But deep down, Esther had an overpowering feeling that sooner or later, something would bring her back here. I want sooner rather than later, though. Don't be such a... Okay. Leaving the cemetery behind, she finished up the remaining chores in a distant, murky haze of thought. Her dream, the mausoleum, the key in particular disturbed her greatly. It almost certainly belonged to Isaiah, which meant it had likely fallen out of his pocket in the woods. But why? Why would he be carrying something so specific with him, especially such a distance away from the manor? Had he been out on a walk, or was he running away? Everything about it seemed so strange, including the remarkable coincidence that she'd stumbled upon such a tiny thing. It was almost as if she had been meant to find the key, or as if it wanted to be found. Okay, game. I get it. Spooky. Let me check it out then. Esther returned to the manor as the afternoon began steadily waning into evening. Her unsettling discovery made her want to head straight for the study in the hope that she could find something about the mausoleum in Isaiah's writings. But as she started to pass by the slightly open bedroom door, a strange hesitation suddenly forced her to stop. Her dream, those words of loathing that Zaina spoke, the idea of hearing them again made Esther uncontrollably shudder. It took all of her willpower to force herself closer to the door, to lean forward and peek inside. Zaina's small form was curled up peacefully atop the bed sheets, fast asleep. She looked as innocent as any human could possibly be, her gentle expression completely different from that cold look Esther had witnessed in her nightmare. Of course she did. It was only a dream. Just a lingering dream. Sighing quietly, Esther pulled back from the door. She'd never been so paranoid about something before. It wasn't a welcome change, that much she could say for certain. They're very good at making me feel anxious as well, though. Good writing. Inside the study, the sun's warm rays leaked in sleepily through the window, though they were already beginning to recede. It was still bright enough to read without a candle, so Esther hurried over to an untouched shelf, beginning to quickly leaf through various loose papers. She scanned each page for a mention of the mausoleum before setting it aside, trying to keep herself more focused on a topic of interest. However, almost everything she saw was related to the study of magic. Charms, hexes, talismans, and many other clearly non-scientific things. Before long, the sun had fully receded into darkness, and she had little choice but to light the candles in order to keep reading. Then, as her eyes flicked across another unrelated journal entry, something about it caught her attention. It was unmistakably Isaiah's handwriting, but it seemed even shakier and more chaotic than before. As usual, she couldn't contain her curiosity. Raising it up to the light, she peered at the erratic words, trying to parse his unstable penmanship. What's it this time? Once corrupted by the evils of society, there's no redemption for a faltering spirit. Simple pleasures turn to bitter cynicism, childlike wonder shifts into suspicion, and a love for life becomes a need for relief, an outlet to escape the dread of facing another day. But in my daughter's unending joy, I have rediscovered a meaning for my own existence, a redemption from all these poisonous thoughts and feelings. But in my soul wishes that her smile never darkens and remains forever unbroken by worldly sorrows and disillusionment. She will be fully independent, completely removed from the mundane evils of society. No one shall find her here, and she shall not go to them. Alas, I know that it is only a matter of time before someone ventures into these woods despite their ill reputation. For that reason, I have redoubled my efforts to protect this place, as I know my days are swiftly running out. Though my recent research of the arcane has yielded little, I have stumbled upon an ancient charm of warding that should serve me well. In order for a living human to find the house, they must either share my blood or be carrying one of my possessions! Any common thing will do, as long as it is attached to a memory of mine. If I had remained in contact with Jeremiah and never asked him to visit, I would have only needed to send him a letter with a trinket attached. But now any passers-by will subconsciously keep the distance from the ward's border, so subtly that they surely will never notice it, even if they are actively seeking the manor. In this way, I will keep the two of us safe in our isolation. Even when I am gone, there's no risk of Zaina ever being found and lured away by an intruder. Oh, baby! This security brings me some comfort in my last remaining days of lucid thought. I love her so very, very dearly, my Zaina. I am distinctly, painfully aware that I do not deserve her. I've become little more than a bit... Oh, fuck off. Thank you, Twitch. Appreciate it. You will get your Pikachu. Oh man. Thank you for the pet.
Pikachu. Pika pika. Pikachu.
Yes, there you are. Yes, this is where I am. Hello. I'm so sorry, I don't know. Completely died. For no good reason. Once again. Connection's very much there. I'm sorry, when did the... I hope you guys didn't miss out on any of the text now. Like, I'm keeping a lookout to the connection all the time, but... it completely dying is always... yeah. We good now, though? Send a letter to manage to invite someone. Wait, I can't... I think I can... I'll go back a little. Okay. If I had remained in contact with Jeremiah and never asked him to visit, I would have only needed to send him a letter with a trinket attached. But now any passersby will subconsciously keep their distance from the ward's border so subtly that they surely will never notice it, even if they're actively seeking the manor. In this way, I will keep the two of us safe in our isolation. Even when I'm gone, there's no risk of Sena ever being found and lured away by an intruder. The security brings me some comfort in my last remaining days of lucid thought. I love her so very, very dearly, my Sena. I am distinctly painfully aware that I do not deserve her. I've become little more than a bitter shell, something that once harbored a relentless investment in the world around him, but no longer. No matter how much I attempt to change my ways, I feel as if I'm made of stone, unable to alter or improve myself without crumbling into useless pieces. That is why I would do anything, everything, to keep her from becoming what I am. If she never tastes the scorn of a life beyond nature's boundaries, then she will be spared from the spiritual death it harbors. She will always retain her innocence, her childlike love for all she sees, and no one may ever shatter the fragile beauty her world yet retains. If she comes to despise me for keeping her here, then so be it. It pains me to know she does not see the truth behind my warnings, but one day, I hope she will come to understand how I only acted out of love, selfish though it may be. Ayo! Bro, you can't keep her imprisoned in the middle of nowhere. What the fuck? I take back what I said about it. Oh yeah, he's going to like her. He's going to become a good father. No. I take it back. Her gaze finally lifted from the rambling woods. It took her a moment to fully process what she'd read, connecting it to the very same coincidence she'd been dwelling on earlier. The key. Murmuring aloud in astonishment, she unconsciously reached down for the small lump in her pocket. Did his warding charm actually work? Was that why, despite the rumors of someone living in the forest, nobody had ever discovered the manor before? And if she'd never stumbled upon Isaiah's key, would she have passed right by this place, avoiding it without ever noticing? If you believe in the supernatural, maybe. But Isaiah had never wanted anyone else to come here. If he'd known Esther was living with his daughters, he would have been furious at both of them. A sharp pang of guilt cut through her, despite the fact that she didn't agree with his outlook. Surely it wasn't fair for him to keep Sena isolated, and yet, the idea of shattering Isaiah's dying wishes filled her with a deep sadness. In a way, she almost felt like she knew him. Through all his intimate writings and Sena's descriptions, she'd come to understand at least a part of him, enough to feel his bitterness and sorrow. To think that he would have hated Esther if he saw her now, taking over his place at the manor, sharing her life and experiences with Sena. He would have sought to tear them apart. Oh! Oh my god! At that moment, a horrible dizziness crashed into Esther, sending the world into a blurry spiral. She could hear her ears ringing. Mine too! Mine too! The fuck? For a moment it felt like she was about to lose consciousness completely. Stumbling out into the hallway, she made her way unsteadily towards the bedroom, leaning against the wall for support. Sena was gone. It didn't surprise her, but seeing an empty room made a strange panic flutter in her chest. Part of her wanted to call out, but no, she was fine. This had to be only a short dizzy spell. No, the screen's turning red. It wasn't time to take her medicine yet. Still too early. And yet she felt so weak, as if either she or the world would come crumbling down at any moment. If she laid down for a few minutes, maybe the awful sensation would leave her. She just wanted it to leave.
There. Esther? Esther? Esther?
Sena's voice suddenly permitted the ringing in her ears.
Hi.
Turning around, she saw the smaller girl watching her with obvious worry and confusion in her eyes.
Esther? Are you right? Do you have a fever?
She quickly reached up to put her palm on Esther's forehead, trying to feel her temperature. No, I'm fine. Just a little dizzy. Oddly enough, right as she spoke those words, the sensation abruptly vanished. She still felt slightly off balance, but the ringing had stopped completely.
Dizzy? Oh dear. You haven't eaten since this morning, have you? I wonder if that's it. You really don't eat nearly enough, Esther.
Sighing affectionately, Sena reached out to take her hand, pulling her gently back towards the hallway.
Why don't we go start on dinner? A meal and some hot tea would make you feel better, I'm sure of it.
Alright. I'm sorry for making you worry.
Why would you be sorry? It's not like it's your fault. It's hard looking after oneself. Believe me, I should know. That's why it's so nice to have someone else around.
As happy as it made Esther to hear Sena's reaffirmation, a flicker of guilt bit into her stomach again. It refused to fade so easily this time, following her as they descended the stairs to the kitchen. Even when they sat down for the meal, she felt distracted, unable to enjoy their relaxing time together as much as usual. After a while, Sena's presence helped diminish the unpleasant thoughts that haunted Esther. She felt a little more reassured whenever her friend fussed over her, if only because it was a reminder that Sena truly cared. Making the other girl laugh and smile eased her worries too, especially since it seemed like the opposite of what Isaiah had feared would happen. But as they returned to the parlor, warming themselves by the fire like always, a nagging thought found its way to the forefront of Esther's mind. She had to tell Sena about the mausoleum. It didn't feel right to keep the key a secret. Besides, maybe Sena knew something else useful about it, like a clue as to why Isaiah had been carrying the key with him. Oh god, I don't want to mention it. I don't want to know what happens if we do. Could I ask you something, Sena?
Of course, you don't need to ask if you can ask.
Sena giggled lightly. When she saw Esther's solemn expression, however, the smile soon faded from her features. About the mausoleum? I'm not pronouncing that word correctly. I just know it, but I refuse to look it up. Have you ever been inside it?
The mausoleum? No, I haven't.
She shook her head somberly, looking slightly unnerved.
I think I told you before, but I don't have the key.
I found it. I have the mausoleum key. Gasping audibly, Sena stared at her in shock.
You found it? But how? Where? I've searched all over the manor and all through the grounds, even in the woods outside. Did Papa hide it somewhere?
Pulling out the key to offer to Sena, she started to explain what had happened. How she found it far away in the woods, her sudden realization it was for the mausoleum, and her discovery of Isaiah's protective ward around the manor. She was too embarrassed to mention her dream, which in truth was the only reason why she tried the key in the first place. Otherwise, it likely would have slipped her mind completely. But not mine, game. I always remember that key. Once Esther had finished speaking, Sena sat in thoughtful silence for a moment. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out to take the tiny key, curling her fingers around it so lightly that she seemed to be afraid it would burn her.
I'd forgotten about it until now, but I remember Papa mentioning something about a ward. That wasn't long before.
She traded off, holding the key tightly against her chest. Maybe the... No, hold on. He said it was a ward and it would keep people away unless they had also his blood or something he has. Otherwise, I was about to say, like, Maybe when he lost the key, he himself was unable to return to the manor. But that's not true. He obviously has his own blood, so he could return anytime. No forgets nothing. Absolutely nothing. No. I know everything. Absolutely, all the time. You tell me something once, I will never forget. That's a lie. Esther put a gentle shoulder on her hand. A gentle hand on her shoulder. In response, Zaina smiled at her gratefully, still a little visibly shaken, but she seemed to recover herself quickly. Papa did warn me to never go into the mausoleum, especially not with him. He probably carried the key around so I couldn't find it. But he always refused to tell me why I couldn't go inside. It was so frustrating. Again, her mind unwillingly flashed back to her dream. A sense of foreboding crawled over her, but she did her best to force it away and ignore it. Maybe we could take a look there together sometime? If it seems safe, I mean. I wouldn't want to go too deep inside if it's falling apart, of course. I'd like to see it. I don't know why, but it feels important somehow. Well, then maybe it is important. It's worth believing in your instincts. They know a lot more than we do, I think. Her smile slowly began to brighten again, and she reached up to poke the tip of Esther's nose teasingly. Ow. Huh? What do you mean, ow? I barely even touched your nose. You don't know your own strength. My whole face went numb. Esther. Unable to contain herself at Zaina's pounding, Esther broke into stifled laughter. Zaina joined in, and before long they fell into a comfortable, easy chatter while curling up on the couch. Don't forget to take your medicine. At her friend's behest, Esther shared some stories about her time at the academy, and of the days back before she contracted the Pale. Though her thoughts still occasionally drifted back to the mausoleum, sharing her findings with Zaina had lifted a huge burden from her shoulders in much-needed relief. Zaina's interest in everything she said helped distract her too. She had never met anyone who held such an interest in what she had to say. It fascinated her how the most mundane things, laws, customs, crimes, politics, enraptured the other girl so much. The only views she'd acquired of the world had come from Isaiah and the various books of fiction and non-fiction he'd given her to read. It was a very limited, carefully curated selection of knowledge, focused mostly on the natural world, and even her fictional stories were so fantastical that they barely touched on any aspects of modern society. Esther found it interesting too, how explaining her own culture aloud made it sound so odd and contrived. There were countless vestigial laws and customs that had no place anymore, and yet most people still treated them as indispensable. In a way, Esther could understand Isaiah's scorn for civilized society. Falling into patterns of traditional thought, never questioning them, leading one into a cycle of misery without ever fully understanding it. It really was frustrating. And Zaina, spared as she was from such thoughts, seemed so blissfully beyond all of it. Perhaps that explained why Esther's guilt refused to be rationalized away. Like Isaiah, she only wanted what was best for her friend. The idea that she was somehow contaminating Zaina's mind with outside influences made her feel deeply uncertain, even if the other girl seemed so eager to learn about the world outside her own. Finally, as the fire began to die down, the pair returned upstairs to the room. As Zaina put on her nightgown, Esther quickly injected herself with her nightly medicine, gritting her teeth to finish it as quickly as possible. Luckily, it seemed easier than normal today, maybe because another presence was nearby. After both of them had changed into their more comfortable nightwear, they crawled under the covers before the chill could seep into their bones. This time, Zaina was still awake when she snuggled up to Esther, draping an arm across her waist.
Ah, so sleepy. Good night, Esther.
Sleep well, Zaina. A peaceful, warm silence draped over them after they exchanged words, replaced by the calm rhythm of their breathing. Before long, Esther found her consciousness easily ebbing away. It was the gentlest sleep she had ever fallen into. In her last moments of coherent thought, she found herself deeply, contently grateful for it. And then she had another nightmare. And then, lulled off by the warmth of Seina's arms and the coziness of her soft pillow, she sank into a comfortable darkness. Ah. A small white shape lay fallen among the leaves. As he bent down to pick it up, Isaiah felt a strange sharp pang in his chest and his throat tightened uncomfortably. Let me guess, a cat died. She hadn't dropped it. No! It's not the actual cat. She'd thrown it tearfully to the ground, turning away as if she couldn't bear the sight of it.
You're so unfair. Why can't I go there? Why can't I have a friend? You don't love me at all. You only care about yourself.
Ooh. Foolish girl. Shouting at him so rashly, then running off into the middle of the night. What was she thinking? If she wasn't careful, she could get hurt. She might trip and fall or run into a wild animal or get lost out in the woods. He thought he'd raised her to be smarter than that. Oh no. Holding the white cat under one arm, Isaiah began to swiftly stride after her, his jaw tightly clenched. She'd run off in the direction of the graveyard. Little wonder, considering how it seemed to be her favorite place. But he'd always disliked it. No matter how many times he visited the cemetery, he could never shake the unpleasant feeling of being watched by someone. Seina! Stop this ridiculous behavior. Don't act like a spoiled, petulant child. But isn't she a spoiled child? Although he called out to the darkness in a loud, stern tone, his voice briefly cracked. This was a waste of time for both of them, and if she scraped her knee or twisted an ankle running blindly through the trees, it would be even more of an inconvenience, wouldn't it? She'd never acted so impulsively before. Perhaps she'd inherited her mother's carelessness after all, and it was finally beginning to rear its ugly head in her behavior. As he entered the cemetery grounds, his gaze quickly scanned across the sea of graves. There was no sign of Seina, but in the distance he glimpsed something that made his blood run cold. The mausoleum doors, they were open. Had she fled inside there? Uh-oh. His strong claustrophobia had kept him from ever venturing into that place. But from old writings on the manor grounds, he knew there was a deep labyrinthine set of catacombs. Untouched for many, many years. Running around in steps without any light was beyond foolish. What on earth had gotten into that girl? For hell's sake, damn it all, everything. Although his first instinct was to charge in after her before she could get too far, he forced himself to stop. If he went in blind, then they would both end up lost. He had to go back and fetch a lamp first. He had to follow his mind before his instincts. After a long moment of hesitation, he turned sharply on his heel and dashed towards the manor. Once he grabbed the first lamp he found inside, Isaiah ran back to the graveyard as fast as he could, panicked adrenaline flooding through his veins. In one hand, he still clutched a small stuffed toy, squeezing it so tightly that his sharp knuckles seemed on the verge of rupturing through his skin. Seina. He couldn't let any harm come to her. Foolish, foolish girl. He taught her not to act rashly, warned her over and over again. There's an O on that CG, and it creeped me out immensely when I noticed just now. Holy shit. Of course she didn't listen to him. She was her mother's daughter, an uncontrollable flame intent on burning itself out. Why wouldn't she just listen to him, realize he was protecting her, giving everything just to keep her safe, the ungrateful little... Clenching his teeth, he forced himself through the mausoleum. Why? Brain to mouth filter, please work. Aha! Mausoleum. Okay, I'm still saying it wrong. Oh. His footsteps echoed off the walls, a sharp but hollow sound, and loud, far, far too loud. The lit lamp in his hand only illuminated a few feet in front of him, the remaining darkness blocking him in tightly on every side. Down the cracked stairs, dust clogging his lungs, his heart racing at a sickening speed. His mind struck by the image of Sena's terrified face, alone in the dark wherever she was now. Soon he emerged into the decrepit corridor. There was still no sign of Sena, only the long, ominous shapes of caskets buried in the walls and standing along the hallway like silent sentinels resting in the dark. Though the ceilings were higher than he expected, he still felt his chest suddenly tighten, forcing his breaths to grow shallow. Sena. Her name emerged from Isaiah's lips as little more than a weak, fearful whisper. As the sound of his own voice sank into his head, a bitter bile swiftly rose to the back of his throat. What a pathetic coward he was. Unable to call out for his own daughter, petrified by his baseless phobia. Sena! Sena, can you hear me? When he forced himself to shout, however, instead of carrying any farther, his voice seemed to die out within a moment. It was as if something had smothered it, something beyond the underground walls that surrounded him. Even if he were to scream, the sound would surely be suffocated before it could echo any further. The unnatural acoustics were only a product of his fear. More importantly, if Sena was here, he had to find her. Quickly now, before she wandered any deeper into the labyrinth. Well, I definitely don't like this place either. With the lamp in one outstretched hand and Sena's stuffed animal tucked beneath his arm, Isaiah began to wind his way through the corridors. In one of his pockets, he had the withered remnants of several flowers Sena had given him not long ago. Silly as it was, he preferred to keep them on his person instead of putting them in a vase. Now, however, it was necessary to use them for another purpose. Whenever he was about to round another corner, he dropped a small colored petal at the edge. It would be enough to help him find his way back, most likely. Sena, I'm not cross with you. Come out and we act as if none of this has ever happened. As he called out for her again, forcing himself to sound calm and dryly patient, his eyes fell on a statue across the hall. He had already passed an unsettling amount of them, but their tall, shrouded figures never ceased to disturb him. I'll make it part of your favorite tea and we read together by the fire. That's your favorite way to spend a cold night, isn't it? Felt better than huddling in the dark, in the cold. The smile that weakly threaded across his lips felt wrong, like a coffin opened from the inside. Something that never should have happened. Something that could have been avoided. No, he hadn't done anything wrong. Sena, please. Another corner. Another long, empty corridor that stretched out before him, same as all the others. Was she even here? Should he turn back? But what if he left, not knowing she was just around the next corner? No, the door was open. She had to be in here. He knew she was. He knew it. Don't treat your father like this. If you want me to apologize, I will, I promise. But don't run away from me. The strength in his voice slowly crumbled, returning to the same trembling whisper as before. Bitter and self-pitying, yet still pleading, clinging to the arrogant faith that he deserved to get his daughter back. But he did, didn't he? Hadn't he done everything for her? Given everything for her? How could she just disappear? Leave him, her father, alone and lost, searching in vain, panicking and hopeless. Then he glimpsed it. A disturbance in the dust, the shadow of a footprint. His heart leapt. It had to be hers. Another and another leading down the corridor, around another corner. He had to follow. Oh God. He ran. The pounding in his chest threatened to stop his heart altogether, so intense that it overwhelmed him with dizziness and fresh nausea. But if she was there, and she was here, he had to find her. They had to escape. But it wasn't safe. Something about it was wrong. He could feel it eating away at his head, into his head. Waiting, watching, staring, lurching, moving, following, hunting, closing in, closer, closer, closer. running in circles, following his own footsteps, faster, closer, finally. Found. There, around the next corner. They were there. Their faces, oh, their faces. He knew it, he knew it, he knew it. He had to run. It wasn't her. It never was her. It was always them. Run. He had to run. Run. But no matter how much he ran, they were always right there. And when he stared at them, their voices entered his head. Peel off your skin. Ew. No?
Drill inside your skull. Drag out your intestines.
A pure terrified hatred and rejection of everything. Of himself. Oh, what's going on? Okay, I guess there's the horror. He couldn't leave. There was no exit. There were never any petals, never any footprints. Too late. They were crawling in his ears, eating into his head, grinding it all up. Living inside him, pulling him down into a casket, shutting the lid. Down, 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 down. Oh, that was cool. Rot. Decay. You ended it, Isaiah. Holy fuck, bro! A loud choked gasp tore from her throat. She jerked upright, panting and coughing, as sweat dripped off her forehead and into her eyes. A dream? No, another nightmare. But she couldn't remember it. No! Oh god. What on earth had she seen? It was horrible, so horrible, and yet it had completely vanished from her mind, leaving behind no trace except her frantically racing heartbeat. To her surprise... Thank you, bot. To her surprise, the spot beside her on the bed was empty. It was still dark, so why had Sena left? No! Oh, you think she went there on her own in the middle of the night? Don't follow her. If you follow her right now and find footsteps that could maybe be hers, the same thing's gonna happen to her. Don't do that. And then as she stared numbly at the white sheets, she realized she could hear something. The soft pattering of rain. She hadn't awoken in the middle of the night. It was just a dark, gloomy morning. Pulling herself to the side of the bed, Esther shifted to stand on her feet. Ugh! When her legs suddenly started to give way, she managed to grab the bedpost to steady herself just in time. A dull, numbing sensation spread along her spine, slowly draining the energy from her surrounding muscles as it traveled further downward. It was painfully familiar. The same reaction she'd felt so many times before, on dark days where she tried to drag herself upright after awakening. But since she'd been staying at the manor, she hadn't experienced it again fully, until today. Esther drew in a deep, unsteady breath. She could do it. Even while acutely aware of her own weakness, the feeling of being a severed puppet, she could still force herself to move. Gingerly, carefully, trying to suppress her fear of falling at any moment. Moving around the bed's perimeter, holding onto the edge with one hand, Esther slowly staggered over to her folded clothes. The crippling numbness gradually became less noticeable as she dressed herself, her subconscious mind adjusting to the nearly dead weight of each limb. Part of her was begging to lie back down to try and sleep off the debilitation, but she wanted to stay awake.
Hello, TK. Good evening. How you doing? I hope you're good.
To go and read Sena, to face the day, to make progress with Isaiah's research. Anything, no matter how small, was better than surrendering completely.
Don't go outside.
After setting herself for a few minutes, Esther made her way down the stairs, adjusting to the weight a little more with every step.
Oh! Thank you so much for the raid. Welcome, raiders. Welcome, raiders. Hi. I'm new. I like the color pink, visual novels and JRPGs, and we're currently playing a game that I can't pronounce. If you can pronounce this word, feel free. I cannot do it. Oh dear, here's a dear. Welcome. You're playing Sea of Thieves. I hope you had a fun stream. Also, Pikachu for the raiders. Yes. I'm trying not to say the same, Pikachu for the raiders, of course. Ever since you pointed out, I say it the same all the time. Pikachu. there. Thank you.
We just awoke from a nightmare, a very scary nightmare, in this game. And also our illness is acting up, so we can barely move, but we're trying. The other girl, we don't oh no, there she is. Okay, we can see her now. I can finally understand why the game has a horror tag. Make a note with different things to say. This is a kinetic visual novel, so the only thing we're doing is reading. There's no choices or anything, but I feel like we're getting closer to like the peak of the story. I hope we are. At least I need to know what happens. Sorry, it's buffering there. Yeah, Twitch is being shitty today. The stream died on me completely as well already, so I have no clue. I hope it's gonna run okay-ish for a little more though. I hope you're good. How was your stream? You had an awful time today too. Oh, okay. So maybe it's not me for once. Wow. She could see Zayn, a small figure seated in a chair before the fire, holding a mug of tea in her hands. Ah. When she noticed Esther, Zayn blinked, her eyes drifting away rather suddenly. She took a long sip of her tea before lowering the cup with a faint smile on her lips. It seemed different somehow. Thin, uncertain. Hello, Esther. I woke up early today and couldn't get back to sleep. I've already been doing things around the house for a little bit. Since it's raining, I'm going to clean the parlor and the rooms at the back of the manor I don't use much. But you can go ahead and spend the day with Papa's research if you like. Pirate time was fun. We had a little relaxing time with shanties. Ooh, nice! That does sound fun. We had a relaxing time having horrible nightmares. And being suspicious of people around us. There's only one person around us. The art style is so cute. The art style is cute. It is a horror visual novel though. Well, more mystery and a little bit of horror, I guess. Cachexia raid! Yay! Thank you for the raid. Thank you for coming with the raid. I already had breakfast, but I left some for you in the kitchen. There was something unusually strained about Zaina's voice, as if the casual brightness of her words was forced, an attempted show instead of her normal, easy warmth. Well then, I'm going to start with one of the old storage rooms, I think. I'll see you later. Finishing the rest of her tea in a gulp, she set her empty cup on the end table, swiftly rising to her feet. Yeah. Thank you for the meal. That's alright. If you want anything else before dinner, there's plenty in the pantry. Good luck with the research. After a brief pause, she turned to hurry off towards the stairs, her swift footfalls echoing through the foyer. Her absence left Esther with a twisted knot in her gut, a sudden, almost nauseated fear that she'd done something horribly wrong. But how? Sienna had been acting perfectly fine the previous night, even curling up tightly against her for comfort. She didn't seem sick and hadn't mentioned a headache, so it seemed unlikely for pain to be the cause of it. Maybe she can share your nightmares. Or maybe she's one of those beings or something, and not human, I don't know. Perhaps she was just in a bad mood. Not everybody could be happy and warm for every moment of their waking lives. There was no use in overthinking it now, especially since it was probably nothing. It only unnerved her because of the resemblance to a previous dream. That was all. Not human. I mean, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if any of that was the case. That was all. What do you mean resemblance of your earlier dream? She woke up and had no memory of the dream itself, though. After forcing her tightened stomach to eat some of the food Zaina prepared for her, Esther returned to Isaiah's study. But as she reached for the door, she noticed it was fully shut. Had she left it that way yesterday? She couldn't remember much, not beyond the dizzy spell that had overtaken her. Oh. Oh, candle. Once she'd stepped inside the study, Esther lit a few candles to relieve the grey gloom, shivering a little from the cold. The study didn't feel particularly unsettling or eerie to her anymore. What the fuck? Echo! Stop! Oh my god! I don't know what I said to have my Alexa start speaking, but she suddenly started talking about bachelor degrees, and that was scary. Suddenly having something talk from like behind you, like what? Holy shit! Oh god, what good? You prefer a cute animal if she's not human? Maybe she's a cat. The cat was cute. A good amount of times to jump scare, isn't it? Oh god. Thank you for the bath. Instead, it brought her a strange sense of comfort as a place she could connect with somehow. Picking up the remaining books and papers from the shelf she started yesterday, Esther sat down at Isaiah's desk and pulled over a candle. Despite the heavy... Goddammit, I already forgot again how to say. Oh, thank you for the non-binary. Despite the heavy lethargy weighing down her body, she was still determined to get through at least a little bit of reading today. Even if her efforts were ultimately fruitless, it was better than doing nothing. As she picked up one of the books, a long rolled up piece of paper stuck beneath it suddenly fluttered onto her lap. Once she smoothed it out across the desk, Esther saw the familiar scribble of Isaiah's handwriting, though this piece seemed a little neater, more formal. He even titled it, albeit haphazardly, at the top of the page. Preliminary Findings on God Spirits. Propping her chin up on one hand, she leaned forward in her chair and began to read. Okay, what's gonna be this time? Note to Jeremiah, kindly read over these pages and tell me, quite honestly, if I sound like a madman. I certainly feel like one. I penned it half in jest, thinking I might turn it into an abstract for an academy publication, before remembering that I told the head he was a sniveling little bureaucrat with the mental facilities of a mosquito. Still, old habits remain difficult to shake. Perhaps you might publish it under your name if you think any of it may hold water. At the very least, you might make some of the rusty old codger's hearts give out from the mention of anything remotely metaphysical. Preliminary Findings on God Spirits. A treatise on Arafel and the Pale Name drop. Over the course of several years of research, I've discovered a remarkable amount of literature on the universal presence of God spirits, entities lesser known as the Arafel. In essence, they are formless energy, one that can travel from human surroundings into their physical body. What attracts them the most is the power of strong emotion, the waves of energy released by feelings such as despair, frustration, anger, and of course, love. However, when they enter a host, they will begin to consume all of their energy, numbing their bodily strength as well as the intensity of their emotions. Still, as tempting as it remains to simplify and generalize them, the Arafel do not appear to be creatures of evil. It seems more accurate to describe them as forces of nature, following a primeval impulse to survive at any cost. They feed off the energy of consciousness itself, leeching from both the impulses of the nervous system and the soul's connection to the universe. The informal title of God spirits comes from the fact that they are simply too overpowering for the current human mind. To coexist with them, it would require a divine level of inexhaustible strength. As for their existence in the world, for the vast majority of cases, they are completely invisible to the eye. From my research, it seems likely that almost every human unknowingly carries at least several of these spirits within them, but displays the draining effects under different names. Curiously enough, the act of becoming overly conscious of this foreign presence seems to attract further Arafel to the host. There appears to be no limit to the amount that can infect their body. Indeed, the more they dwell within a person, the more spirits are drawn to them in a slow, steady loop. However, there have been several strange cases of the complete opposite occurring. A pure vessel, hitherto untouched by the spirit's invasions, can suddenly become highly susceptible to them within a very short time period. Extreme stress and powerful emotion may act like a magnet for the Arafel, drawing them in, if present, from the surrounding individuals and environment like an immense vortex. This may also occur with those already possessed, though it is even less common, for these spirits rarely congregate in large numbers. But the most interesting facet of these spirits is a potential connection to a common, incurable disease. That which is known as the pale Cachexia. I don't know how to say this. Cachexia. If the Arafel do in fact exist, a possible relation to the pale is one that cannot be ignored. Indeed, if one connected earlier writings on the god spirits with the instances of those who had recovered from the pale, one could glean the true nature of a possible cure. With that said, the only potential cures one could surmise are surmise are disheartening to say the least. One is virtually impossible, and the other impossibly cruel. I will discuss these methods in an attempt to learn how they might be potentially achieved, but attempting either of them with our current knowledge of the aerofoil would be thoroughly foolish. The crueler method is the more feasible of the two, but it would ultimately require... Read it! I do not care if you don't care for it because it's unscientific. Cachexia? Cachexia. I mean, sounds better than what I'm trying to say. Esther quickly turned the paper over, her heart skipping a beat. It was empty. No! No continuation at all. But in his preface at the top, Isaiah had mentioned multiple pages. The others were close by then, surely. Scattering a pile of books across the desk, she searched through them with intense, increasingly anxious focus. It had to be here somewhere. It had to be. But even after she combed through every book, went through every pile, and even ran back over to the bookshelf to search through it, she found nothing. I can't believe it. She muttered to herself, so stunned and crestfallen that the words came from her without thought. The aerofoil. Esther still found it nearly impossible to believe they existed, but if they did, then Isaiah had to be on the right track. Even if he sounded skeptical of the potential cures, they might hint at something she could pursue further. It was, without a doubt, the very best lead she'd found so far. Why then did her luck have to suddenly run out like this? Obviously, because we're not yet at the peak of this game. Damn it. It's here, I know it is. Clenching her jaw, she began to comb her way through the entire row of shelves, pulling out every stray piece of paper she laid eyes on. It felt like fate was taunting Esther, dangling the key to her condition in front of her face before hiding it away again. The missing pages were simply too much of a cruel coincidence. Why, oh why, were these papers the only ones she couldn't find? Eventually, after what seemed like hours of fruitless searching, Esther fell back on the dusty bed in defeat. The frustration from such valuable information slipping through her fingers was all but soul-crushing. There was a chance it could still be here or somewhere else in the house, but a fresh wave of exhaustion crashed down upon her, sapping away any remaining strength she had to go hunting for it. Curling up into a little ball, she closed her eyes, listening to the drone of rainfall as the storm carried steadily on. An endless storm so heavy it seemed like it might wash everything away. She wished it would. She wished she could wake up to a new morning, to Sena's happy greeting, to a productive day in the garden and research in the study. If only sleep could bring something new, something different, something better. Something beyond a brief reprieve from the everyday burdens, the problems that were always there, still there whenever she woke up. But it never could. Smiling grimly at her own foolish thoughts, she sank into the arms of a long and restless slumber. Uh-oh. A quiet, steady knocking stirred Esther awake. Hours must have passed. A much heavier darkness had replaced the overcast gloom from earlier. She slowly swung her legs over the side of the bed, rubbing her blurry eyes with a hand. If anything, the uneasy rest had only made her more tired. Esther? Are you in there? Yes. You can come in, Sena. After a moment, the door slowly creaked open. Sena stepped into view with obvious hesitation, as if she were afraid of what she might find inside. Esther, are you alright? No, I don't trust you anymore. She nodded. Have you eaten anything since this morning? No. I haven't been hungry. Huh. Well, there's some dinner left over in the kitchen if you'd like it later. Thank you. Her reply faded into a long, uncomfortable pause that seemed to stretch on and on. In reality, the silence only lasted a few seconds, but it was crushing enough to drive Esther past the typical avoidance of confrontation. Have I upset you somehow? You've been acting differently today. No, you haven't done anything. I'm sorry if I made you feel like that.
I've just been thinking about a lot today.
The initial relief she felt from Seina's reassurance soon faded into uncertainty. Even if she'd done something wrong, Seina might be too afraid of hurting her feelings to tell her directly.
Esther, do you mind if we take a walk outside?
In the middle of the night?
It feels like a long time since I've really seen the moon and stars.
Of course, let's go. Mm-hmm. Seina smiled at her faintly, but it seemed just as strained as it did that morning, if not more so. A stronger sense of anxiety began to gnaw at her stomach, even as she followed the smaller girl outside, trying to reassure herself that she really hadn't done anything wrong. Esther couldn't escape the uneasy thoughts seeping into her head. I don't like this. With the cold night air settling on her skin, they slowly made their way across the manor grounds. The silence had a deafening quality to it, far different from even the quiet shyness of the first meeting. It was as if Seina no longer knew what to say to her. A vast distance had opened up between them, so inexplicably and one-sided that it left Esther horribly confused. Was she in another dream? Or had her earlier dream crossed over into reality? Or, more likely, perhaps her dream only reflected the reality that had been there all along? In the midst of the quiet walk, they wandered into the cemetery, through the maze of scattered graves. Seina seemed to be heading towards the pond by the her slow footsteps forming a path through the long, sinister shadows cast by the headstones. Being here at night unnerved Esther by itself, but with Seina remaining so eerily silent, it made her heart start to race even faster. As impossible and nonsensical as it was, it felt like a third presence was right behind them. Right behind them. Or all around them. Unable to contain her reflexes, she threw a swift glance over her shoulder, but there was nothing her eyes could see. Noticing her anxious behavior, Seina gave Esther a look of confusion. In response, Esther quickly lowered her gaze. It almost felt like she was going insane. Blurring dreams and reality, sensing odd presences, falling into pieces at the first hint of Seina's displeasure. Fears that she couldn't even share with her friend because Esther was afraid of her judgment too. Even more than it frightened her, the thought filled her with a deep sadness. Before long, the cold grey stone of the why do I keep saying Mya? was towering over them. But as they approached the pond beside it, Seina slowed to a halt. Esther paused beside her, wondering why they had stopped. We do not even have a lamp with us. I know.
Could we stay here for a little while? Or at least, I think I'll stay. If it's too cold for you, you can always head back to the fireplace.
I'm fine.
That's good. I wish I brought a blanket for the grass now.
Sighing softly, she lowered herself down onto the ground, the hem of her dress spilling over to lightly touch the pond's surface. After a brief pause, Esther followed suit, pulling her own skirt in close to her legs. Another long stretch of silence clouded over them. Esther felt acutely aware of the cold, wet grass beneath her, bringing a sharp chill to her bones as her skirt absorbed it. Unable to bring her gaze towards Seina, she watched the stray leaves drifting aimlessly across the water, graced by only faint traces of moonlight.
I've been thinking of about Papa a lot lately. The way he was in the weeks before he died.
At last, Seina's quiet voice rose through the darkness. Devoid of the usual energy, her words were barely above a whisper, slow and monotone.
Even though he'd always had the pail, he fought against it so hard all the time. He worked all day long in the gardens, forced himself to eat when he grew too thin, and he always rose at dawn, even when his constant nightmares kept him awake. And he took care of me all the while, always doing so many things for me.
A pained, resigned longing filled her voice, devoid of any trace of hope. Full moon. When Esther finally turned to face her, Sena was gazing far off in the distance, past the pond and into the thick, unending darkness that lay beyond. Her first instinct was to try and comfort the other girl, but at the same time she had the sense that Sena wanted to keep speaking. This was the first time she'd ever addressed her father's death with someone, and perhaps the first time she processed it fully.
Those last few weeks when he suddenly started changing, they were so awful, I don't even want to remember them. Papa's face had this horrible hollow look, like there wasn't even a soul inside his body anymore. He wouldn't talk to me, he wouldn't even come out of his locked room, no matter how much I cried and begged him to.
Curling her knees up to her chest, she rocked slowly back and forth, still staring blankly into the darkness.
The only time I saw Papa come out was late at night. He thought I had gone to sleep, but I was waiting in the hallway, like every night, for any chance to see him again. But now, I almost wish I hadn't seen him.
Though her gaze finally drifted over to Esther, Sena almost seemed to be looking right through her. She was somewhere else, far, far away, deep inside the recesses of her own memory.
I watched him run downstairs, desperately checking the locks on all the doors, barricading them, covering up the windows. He was mumbling under his breath wild things about being hunted by shadows, things that were going to kill him. It felt like I was watching him go mad.
If they truly did exist, could it have been the Arafel that drove Isaiah into madness? It seemed possible, and yet something struck Esther about it as odd. Isaiah had described the increase of spirits in a house as slow and steady, not something so sudden. But why? Why do you think he changed so quickly? An expression Esther had never witnessed on Sena before suddenly crossed her features, darkening them.
Just before his health started to get worse, we had an argument. It was the only time I ever shouted at Papa. I was so angry back then. But after I calmed down and I realized what I'd done, I really just wanted to die. I felt like he was so disappointed in me, his troublesome, ungrateful daughter. I didn't respect his wishes. I didn't understand that he was only trying to protect me. All I did was make him feel alone again, right until the moment he died.
No tears formed in her eyes. Perhaps she had already wept too many times over it, or else her grief went beyond any outward expression. She simply kept hugging her knees against her chest, staring into Esther without seeing her. She wanted so very, very desperately to comfort her friend, to reach out and pull Sena into a hug, giving her the reassurance that she'd never had since Isaiah's death. But Esther felt frozen in place. There was a depth to Sena's sorrow that she would never understand. Perhaps that was why the other girl had suddenly grown so cold towards her. All the words that came to Esther's mind were too shallow, unable to reach the pain that Sena had buried away in order to continue living. She understood that terrible thought, and yet the silence of Sena's pain was too agonizing for her to stand any longer. It's not your fault, Sena. You can't blame yourself for his illness. It had nothing to do with you. When Esther blurted out her first instinctive response, Sena showed no reaction. Sena, you were only a child. I know you never meant to hurt Isaiah. Please don't blame yourself. You didn't do anything wrong. Again, her words were met with only a numb silence. She couldn't tell if Sena even had heard her or was ignoring her, or if she was making the other girl feel worse by even saying anything. And yet, despite herself, Esther couldn't bite back the question tugging at her mind. The reason why Sena felt so guilty, she had to find a way to understand it somehow. The argument you had with your father, can I ask what it was about? Ooh! Finally, her words triggered a response. Sena's eyes suddenly refocused on her face, holding a strange mixture of fright and revulsion.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. I really don't want to talk about it after all.
Swiftly turning away from Esther, she shook her head vehemently. It was impossible not to feel stung by the rejection, even though she knew she had stepped too far. The reflective atmosphere grew tense and uncomfortable again, each second grating by like a loud discordant note.
Esther, is it alright if I have some time alone?
When Sena quietly spoke again, Esther's body abruptly froze up. It was like an icy knife had just driven inside her chest, carving straight through her heart. The back of her eye started to burn and a lump formed at the back of her throat, but with a deep breath, Esther managed to numb herself to the reaction. Ah, don't go there. Wordlessly, she rose to her feet. Unlike her earlier desire to stay close to Sena, she now felt the urgent need to put distance between them. Without giving Esther another glance, the small girl buried her face against her arms. It was clear that trying to speak with her would achieve nothing. There was an almost tangible outer shell around Sena, dividing her from the rest of the world. Turning away, Esther began to trudge back towards the manor. She couldn't fully process things at first. The world seemed surreal, as if she had entered a completely different universe from the one she'd been living in the past few weeks. When she tried to analyze it all, to imagine how things would play out from here, it felt like her mind was too clouded to contemplate more than a few moments ahead. Before she knew it, she was standing back in the manor, staring blankly at the stairs. For a moment, she considered sleeping on the sofa. Sena clearly didn't want to see her, and returning to the living room was a good reminder that Esther was only a temporary guest. But the more she reflected on the idea, the more it seemed like a childish, pathetic ploy for sympathy, a subconscious attempt to guilt Sena to gain her pity. It was better to just rest in a bedroom, even if she did risk making the other girl angry at her instead. Okay. Sleep, however, soon proved impossible. Despite the fatigue that still hung over her, strings of bitter thoughts kept warming into Esther's mind, infesting it with further doubts and uncertainties. All the things she could have said to comfort Sena better, to give her the support she was clearly longing for, an endless well of missed opportunities and imagined outcomes, once where they had reconciled, not gone their separate ways. She hadn't done anything wrong. The rational, level-headed part of her realized that perfectly well, but another louder part of her said it was all her fault. You're gonna get ready for bed? Okay. Thank you. I should as well, but I cannot tell how much more of the game we have left, and I really don't want to, stop here. She should have worked harder, acted more lively, learned how to understand Sena better. Esther wasn't the one who deserved pity. She wasn't the one who lost her father and had been living in isolation since the beginning. Thank you for the hydrate time. And the pet. She was so privileged in comparison, and yet she still had the nerve to feel sorry for herself. Those thoughts clouded in her head like screaming voices, drowning out every rational plea to absolve herself of guilt. Sena deserves better. She'd be better off alone than with someone like you. Stupid, self-centered girl. Never making progress, always falling back into the same patterns of thought. And no matter how much she reassured you, it meant nothing. You're hopelessly lost in your own head. So very, very, very selfish. She tossed and turned, desperately praying for sleep to finally come and relieve her again. Until at some point, the bedroom door finally opened. After a long pause, Esther heard the light padding of Sena's footsteps, approaching the bed with clear reluctance. A drawer opening, clothes shuffling as she changed into her nightgown. Then a small weight pressed down the mattress beside her, and the covers shifted upward. She was lying facing away from Sena, and she could sense the other girl was facing away from her too. It felt so strange. Good night, Esther. The soft, nearly inaudible whisper completely caught her off guard. It was so quiet she almost missed it. Sena must have been unsure whether she was still awake or not. She wanted to say something in return, anything, in the vain hope that it would finally break the awful tension between them. But she couldn't. A mortified guilt kept her petrified, too ashamed and afraid to even acknowledge the other girl. So she laid in silence, pretending she was fast asleep. Eventually, Sena's breathing fell into a slow, steady rhythm. As upset and hurt as she was, listening to the quiet sound helped soothe Esther, if only a little bit. It proved enough to help her slowly drift off, somewhat comforted that Sena had come to rest beside her instead of downstairs. The circling thoughts in her head disintegrated little by little, falling into incoherent images and pieces, until at last her consciousness finally faded away. Another nightmare? No. No, because this is good. This is good. No, I'm sorry. This is great. I do not know how much more of the game we have left. It is now a new day. There can't be too much left. Like, I think we're very much approaching the like finale. But this is good. I'm gonna have us all stop at this motherfucking cliffhanger. And we will finish the game tomorrow. Because, I'm sorry, I cannot actually risk staying up for this long. Like, okay, maybe the game will be over in the next 20 minutes. Maybe it will be over in like another 2 hours. I do not know, and I cannot risk 2 hours. I'm sorry. So we're gonna stop here. We're gonna continue the game tomorrow. Thank you all so much for coming, especially because this was not a scheduled stream. Thank you so much. Everyone who came with the raids, if you're still here, also thank you so much. We're gonna continue this game tomorrow. Definitely finish it. There can't be that much left. The developers themselves said it's 4 to 5 hours. And I'd say, okay, I'll add like, I don't know, like 2 hours more because I have to read it all out myself. And we're at 3.5 hours. So next time I think we'll definitely be able to finish it. But yeah, good night everyone. Let me set up a raid. Let me set up a raid to someone we have not actually said hello to in quite a while because we never stream at compatible times. I wish you a good night. You too. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Here's a raid message as always. Tip is playing a Neo Automata today. Seems to be... seems to be 9S's route already, so let's see what that's all about. I wish all of you a very, very good night. I'll see you all soon. Extremely soon, in fact. Where's my ending song? There it is. Good night, everyone. And bye-bye.